Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call to order this continued hearing of the Board of Appeals. This is on the application of Falcone Properties LLC regarding premises at 7 Pleasant Street, known, well, I guess colloquially as the Bent's Cookie Factory. We met on this application on December 13, 2018, heard a lot of witnesses and a lot of different suggestions about how the project could be improved from neighbors and other people. We continued it to this evening, and in the interim, I understand the applicant has met with the planning board and had a full...
Board of Select Board.
Oh, okay, but I...
Before
want you-
that, the planning board.
Yeah, okay. And so as a result of that, I know the applicant has taken into consideration some of the suggestions of the planning board, and we have Mrs. McGettrick here. Let me do a couple of formalities, and we'll get into the meat of the hearing. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals. With me this evening, to my immediate left, is board member Emmanuel Manials, and to my immediate right is board member Frank O'Brien. The rules of this hearing are going to be the same as the last. We'll hear from the applicant regarding an update of the application, and she can present any, Mrs. McGettrick can present any additional witnesses or evidence that she wants to submit. Then we will certainly hear from people who have questions of the applicant. We'll listen to people who wish to speak in support of the application, people who wish to speak in opposition to the application. The hearing is being tape recorded by Ms. Sutton, trustee clerk, and that's the official record of the hearing. So it's kind of a large room here, and the acoustics aren't the best, and these are microphones for TV land, but they do not project throughout the room. So that would ask that when anyone wants to speak, preface it with your name and address so we'll know who's speaking. If we have to revert to the tape, we can then figure out who's speaking and what they said. We did receive in the interim certain communications from various interested persons. These are not in any particular order. And I'm somewhat fearful that if I read all of these verbatim, everyone will be asleep because it'll be 8 o'clock and everyone will lose interest in the hearing. So what I'm going to do is do a summary of them, but doing justice to what the person is suggesting. This may take about 10 minutes, but it's worth it. A lot of these folks indicated that they're not able to attend the meeting tonight, so they want to be heard. They're entitled to be heard, and I just should indicate that we consider these letters and other submittals absent defamatory statements and the like, which rarely occurs at these Board of Appeals hearings, so we always get highly intelligent letters. We give these the same weight as if the person came and testified right where Mrs. McGettrick is, so they don't have to feel that they're discounted or slighted in any way. So let me begin the process by saying we received an email from Nicole Perona and Brendan Ridge of 11 Jill Kathleen Lane in Milton, Massachusetts. Phone numbers and email numbers are here, but I'm not going to read them. It's dated January 22nd, 2019. And it reads as follows. There are abutters located at 11 Jill Kathleen Lane in Milton. They can't attend the meeting, but they want to express their opinion that they're opposed to this variance application and the proposed zoning changes. They feel that granting the variances would be detrimental to the abutters and surrounding neighbors and would be an undesirable result. Their main concerns with the variance would be the addition of micro apartments, parking noise, undesirable renters, increased activities at the beginning of the month for renters, but I think these are going to be one-year rentals and not monthly rentals, but Mrs. McGettrick can deal with that. They don't see any benefit to the neighborhood in granting the variances, and it'll make the site more congested, more opportunity for traffic accidents. It will lower property values, create an undesirable environment. They're new to the neighborhood, and they chose their location because of the Milton community and the surrounding areas and the safe neighborhoods. And they hope that the Board of Appeals does not support the variances in their nice neighborhood. So we thank Nicole Perona and Brendan Ridge. We have another email, and this is from Lisa Courtney, who resides at 59 Pleasant Street in Milton. It's dated January 23rd, 2019, and this is to the town clerk, but we're going to take it as addressed to the town, to the Board of Appeals. She's emailing her proposal regarding the rezoning at Bent's. Says, the meeting tonight, I cannot be present, but I want to say in this letter, a neighbor, Rob Hallowell, also plans to read it at the meeting tonight since I cannot be there. Thanks for your attention. And she wishes to be recorded that she opposes the proposed zoning relief at 7 Pleasant Street, known to everyone as the historic Bent's factory, that would allow additional residential living space. So we thank Lisa Courtney for her email. We have an email from Chris Twyman. He resides at 2 Arrowhead Lane in Milton. The communication is dated January 16, 2019. Mr. Twyman was the previous owner of this building and operated a bakery and coffee shop there for 3 years. He sold it because the building was in need of much renovations, and it stretched his personal budget. During the sales process, he was impressed with the Falcone family's focus on preserving as much of the building's history that the structure has. And he's a Milton resident. He believes that the Falcone plans for the Bent factory are a perfect blend of the building's historic purpose and updating it for a new generation. That must be us. I hope it is. I look forward to trying the sandwiches when the coffee shop opens again. Thank you for your careful administration of the town. Well, thank you. And he's available to discuss this at any time, and he provides a telephone number. So we thank Mr. Twyman. We have an email from Jeffrey Upton of 324 Reedsdale Road in Milton. It's dated January 15, 2019. He's writing to express his support for the Falcone Company's plans to renovate the Bent's Cookie Factory. He lives just a few blocks from the location. He's moved to his current home in 1998, and for over 2 decades, he's been able to walk to the historic building for a sandwich or a cup of coffee. He would proudly show this property off to his friends and neighbors, explaining where the hardtack was made for the U.S. Navy in 1812, and that it is the oldest continuous operating bakery in the country. He very much would like to see the building preserved and elevated to its highest and best use. The town's residents, he believes, will benefit, the town's finances will benefit, and no one will be negatively affected by the addition of a few apartments and some office space. He missed not being able to attend to visit Bent's for the last few months, and he'd love to see it reopened. And he, again, thanks us for our attention and service to the town, and gives us his telephone number where he can be reached. So we thank certainly Mr. Upton for his communication. We have an email from Rebecca Warner. It's dated January 22nd, 2019. She talks about the esteemed planning board. They'd be pleased to hear that. The select board and the Board of Appeals. It's been almost a week since her grandson cutting the ribbon commemorating the town's first charging station. She's found on the town plan and on the website, and she will study it. Her following comments relate to this application. As a Milton resident, she's been concerned a long time about the long-range plans for the town. There are many things to be considered, and there are effective ways to deal with long-range goals that we need to meet our community standards. It seems to her that It doesn't seem like the plan for the building going up on Elliott at Central considered more than the owner's personal gain. Well, that's not before us tonight. It has little or no thought. We're going to get to Bent's right here. I would hope that the same does not happen to Bent Factory. The historical nature of the building should be maintained as much as possible, offering the immediate community some sense of a town center with town-planned parking and traffic control. Town housing needs should be followed if there are any additional units in the building. Most important of all, the renovations should be as friendly as possible to the environment. All of the goals of the long-range plan must be considered and followed. Thank you for your consideration. Signed by Becky Warner. So we thank Mrs. Warner. We have a short note from Terry Driscoll of 331 Center Street. It says Precinct B. I don't know whether Terry's in the House of Representatives or not, but that's what he says. And he says, I'm writing in support of the Falcone's plans to keep the Bent Cookie Factory open and operating while maintaining its historic charm. I think the proposal for micro apartments makes good sense, knowing there is a segment of the population that does not require a lot of living space. I see these micro apartments improving housing options in Milton, as well as addressing the issue of affordable housing in Milton. Signed, Terry Driscoll. So we thank Mr. Driscoll. We have an email from Fern Israel. It's dated January 9, 2019. My name is Fern Ross Israel, and I have been a resident of Milton since 1987. I would like to voice my desire to see Bent's Cookie as the historic building. I don't feel it is a conflict for a few mini apartments or to continue to have sandwiches and a cafe. It definitely requires upkeep, and I, for one, along with my husband Ronald, would love to see that happen. So we thank Mrs. Israel for her comments. We have an email from Gloria Adam Katekis. It's dated January 9th, 2019. It has come to my attention that the Bent Cookie Factory proposed by the Falcone companies needs a bit of grassroots support. We are longtime town residents and appreciate having a historic building still in use. Its current repurposing is a wonderful example of maintaining the old, the history, the charm, while updating to today's standards. It was always a treat to stop in to purchase broken cookies and a delicious sandwich while supporting this local business. The support of the planning board and the select board should be forthcoming. If it is not, we should like to know why. So that's Mrs. Otokamis, a rather direct commentary. We have an email from Jean and Peter Zimmerman of 64 Hudson Street. It doesn't say Milton, but I assume it is. And it's addressed to Bill Clark, but I think I'll read it if you'll permit me, Mr. Clark. It says, please read and forward the following letter, to the Board of Appeals in particular. We are writing in support of the restoration/renovation of the existing historic Bent's Cookie Factory building. It has been a landmark in our town, and we're pleased that it's being updated without losing its historic character. Please support the completion of the renovation so that we as a town can return to enjoying the proposed cafe and welcoming small residential apartments and commercial tenants to our town. Thank you for your consideration. So we thank Jean and Peter Zimmerman. We have this is an email from Cheryl Tugayas. It's dated January 2nd, 2019. And it essentially says, it's to Bill Clark. She was not sure that Bill received the email, but she wanted it printed for the hearing. And the email is an email that was sent by Brian Walsh of the town of Milton. It's an extensive email. It's maybe 3 or 4, 5 paragraphs. Mr. Walsh is present this evening, and so we acknowledge his email communication, but he'd like to be personally heard instead of having me read this to everyone. And we have finally an email from Lee Toma, dated January 22nd, 2019. Let me just see where she is. 58 Aberdeen Road in Milton. She writes, I'd like to voice my support for the 7 Pleasant Street project. While I'm not a butter, nor do I have any stake in the project, as a longtime Milton resident, I hope there's a way that can be found to preserve the historic Bent's building and ensure that it is financially viable into the future. I would hate for it to fall into disrepair, be torn down, or replaced with a big, bland condominium building. The mixed commercial and residential use at the site may not technically meet zoning, but the commercial use predates our zoning code, and some of the abutters have commented that they find the cafe to be a practical and a convenient local amenity. As for the compact apartments, they may be unusual for Milton, but the town needs more residential capacity. She has toured similar-sized mini apartments in Boston, and she was pleasantly surprised with their livability. The applicant noted that the proposed apartments would have a lower traffic intensity than a commercial use would, so I would hope that the town would allow this use. Alternatively, perhaps the applicant could consider commercial space if the abutters prefer that, but in the end, I hope that a way can be found to preserve the Bent's building. Thank you for your consideration. And thank you, Lee Toma, for submitting her materials. So we'll have all of these as part of the record here. And I think we proceed. Mrs. McGettrick, are you prepared to pick up the ball and
Yes, I am.
continue with your presentation?
Thank you very much. I'm Marion McKettrick. I represent the applicants this evening, and with me is Steve Tedesco, who's the designer for the project, Robert Falcone from Falcone Properties, and tonight we have Greg Morse, who was our original engineer in the project, who was not available at your last hearing because he was having a medical procedure. And I just want to say that the engineer who was at our last hearing, who did an excellent job, has just become a father today.
Oh, well.
So he is not here tonight.
How wonderful.
So we've had a changing of the guard.
That's
But
a
they're all
that's a
familiar
perfect
with the
excuse.
plan, so they will
not a bad
explain
excuse.
It's
details
not
to
a
you.
bad- It's not a bad
Correct.
excuse.
Jeff Hassett is his name. Congratulations to him.
Thank you.
Very briefly, I'm going to just make some remarks, but I did want to add that I have an email from Cheryl Tagayas that she asked me to read to the board. She can't attend the meeting tonight. She's the chair of the planning board. She wants to say, as an individual member of the planning board, she supports the preservation and reuse of the Bent's building proposed by the current owners, commends the proposed mix of uses, allowing for historic preservation, and feels it is considerate of the impact on neighbors. She did hear the concerns of neighbors at the planning board meeting about traffic, parking, and intensity of use. She understands from her experience as an architect, a member of the master plan committee and the planning board, that residential use is a less intensive use than many commercial uses, especially those with retail and food service components, as these generally have many more deliveries, generate more trash, entail multiple visits, and so forth. She does suggest in her email that we may want to consider reducing the residential count by 1, which would reduce the parking requirement by 1. She doesn't know, we are giving parking maneuverability statistics back to the planning board, and we can show that there is adequate turning space on our current parking plan. She talks about that as possibly one reason to do that, but she said, finally, Milton's lost a number of historic structures over the years. It would be a shame to see this building suffer that fate. She's confident that the owners, their tenants, and neighbors can work together so that this historic structure can become an asset to the community once again, which is a nice positive statement. I hope it works.
Great,
We'll
thank
see.
you.
And finally, we did just meet with the board, the select board, and we just went to them we had invited them to tour the building. They came individually. We showed them the plans. You had asked us to get, to tell them about this plan, try to get some feedback. I'm just very quickly going to summarize their comments. They were positive. Katie Conlon said that she supports the use variance. She supports this because it's a less intense use than the existing pre-existing non-conforming commercial bakery use. She says it will diversify our housing stock. It's a good opportunity for young people or for those downsizing. Melinda Collins, she's chair of the town's housing committee. She feels this is a good test on a small scale of small apartments. She thinks it's very important to preserve the historical asset that's Bent's. She knows that any proposal does need to be economically feasible, and she thinks it's a creative reuse proposal. Mike Zulis also said that he thought it was an innovative proposal to preserve the building. He supports it. Chief Wells, or former Chief Wells, who's now the chairman of the Select Board, he said that he had sent comments to the board. I don't know if you found
You
those.
know, he did, I read it, and I did not see
Okay.
it here, but I may have it buried in my papers.
So he didn't say too much, but he's supportive of the proposal, but I don't know what, you'll find his comments eventually, I'm sure.
Well, I want to find them, I don't want to be arrested, or have another awful fate. I have it in my paperwork, it just was not included with
Well,
the,
why don't I just start my comments, and then, if you find them, I'll stop. Would you like me to do that?
no, why
I'll
don't
wait.
we,
Shall we wait?
are you still going through the board of, the Board of Select Persons?
That's it, because there was one
Okay.
member missing who
Then-
just
then
didn't attend
Let me
tonight.
summarize,
He also toured the building. Yeah.
Richard Wells, I keep calling him chief. Maybe that gets him angry, I don't know.
No,
He says, last weekend I had not, this is dated January 10th, 2019. Last weekend I had an opportunity to tour the site of the old Ben's Cookie Factory on Pleasant Street and listen to the proposal before your committee and the planning board regarding their plans. Obviously, living and working in Milton for so long, I had been inside the cookie factory store many times. I never knew that anyone lived in the building. From a historical perspective, it has rich heritage, and I like the concept the Falcones have put forward, preserving this building and giving it life in the 21st century. One thing I do like is that this is a diverse project, not the type we see in Milton very often, but a concept that has taken hold in many other communities. Currently, it is wonderful that housing prices in Milton are so high. Some people would disagree with that, especially younger families. But he says the downside to this are situations such as a young adult who is just getting their journey into adulthood, or a married couple who are trying to save to purchase a house in the future, and he thinks that this project would be very appealing to both of those groups. He also likes the off-street parking and the outside patio concept designed for the commercial cafe space. In closing, I think that this is a proposal that could work and become an attractive asset for the town. Many thanks, Richard Wells. So we thank Mr. Wells for his comments. Mrs. McGettrick,
Okay.
I interrupted you.
thank you very much. I have some, I did another set of remarks, I sent them to the board. I'm not going to read them word for word tonight because a lot of people are here who want to speak, and our designer would like to speak briefly, as would perhaps the engineer. But anyway, the main point I want to make tonight is that this is a proposal that was generated out of a desire to preserve this building. That's the number one goal. In examining possible uses for the building, we of course looked very seriously at the pre-existing non-conforming commercial bakery use. That is the use since 1895, and it has continued. Each owner of this building has continued to do baking and to sell baked goods, and there is the potential to take the second floor of this building and bring in a commercial baking company. And there are certainly interested tenants who want to do that. That's one of the applications that we looked at. The other issue for me, and I think the Falcones have listened to this, it was that there were popular existing uses that had been permitted already. And one was the cafe. Another one more recently, just last year, was the small catering business, which it's one woman, she prepares food and brings it to your home. It's a great small business. And finally, the pre-existing non-conforming office use on the third floor, that's Chris Wyman, who sent you the letter. He runs a software company called Boomwriter that is a writing program for schools. And he began his business in Milton in that space. And I think the Milton Public Schools were his first client. He's now in more than 80 school systems around the country. He's in 9,000. He's in England, he's in Asia, he has offices in Cambridge. He wants to maintain an office in Milton. He lives in Milton. And so he's going to continue to be the tenant in the third floor. It's a pre-existing non-conforming use. It's allowed because of that, even though it's office space. And there's no requirement to create parking specifically for that use. So, but it's a good use. It would interact well with what we've proposed. In fact, people who work there could rent one of these apartments. They certainly would go to the cafe if it were open. When we did our analysis of possible uses, we compared proposals to the impact of what's there, or could be there, as a commercial bakery. A commercial bakery, using Milton's current zoning standards, would require, for 2,600, 2,700 square feet of space, which is what the second floor space occupied by these apartments would be, they would require 11 parking spaces. 6 small apartments, we have estimated, would require 6 at most. These are very small apartments. The leases would be limited to a requirement that there be no more than 1 car for each lease parked on site. There is no on-street parking in Milton, so you can't have more than 1 car and live in one of these apartments. That's a lower parking impact than the commercial use. That was one reason we started looking at it. The other reason, though, is that this is difficult for the applicant. This is a difficult application because there are a number of permitting hurdles that he has to overcome. A multiple unit use in a residential district in Milton requires a variance. That's a high standard, and you have to have a lot of reasons. I'm going to list some of them again. I put them in my application. He also needs a special permit in order to change a pre-existing non-conforming use to any other use. That's a lower standard, so if you meet the variance standard, you probably meet the special permit standard. In order to renovate the interior of this building and move the catering business down to the first floor, he needs an amendment of the catering permit issued last year, and in order to reconfigure the space on the first floor, he needs an amendment to his 1995 cafe permit. And finally, he needs a variance for a sign, because this is a residential district and any new sign is going to require a variance. These are a lot of permitting hurdles. If he were to continue the pre-existing non-conforming use, he doesn't require to redo a parking plan. But if he does the apartments, he not only has to do a parking plan, he has to go to the planning board for site plan approval. And I think I listed 20 or 25 requirements, additional pieces of information about drainage, about turning areas, about working with the town on marking parking spaces in the street. What are we going to do about, are we going to add another drain in the street? We've agreed to all of the requests from the town for improvements related to this site plan improvement, or site plan that's being reviewed by the planning board. We'll be going back to them on the 14th of February. And all of those things have to be decided by the planning board, not by the Board of Appeals. But the planning board cannot vary zoning. So the planning board can't give us relief in the form of saying the setback can be 8 feet rather than 10 feet by the parking lot, or 1 foot at the rear of the parking lot. That has to come from you with the Board of Appeals. So, I mean, we're taking on a pretty significant hurdle, and it's because it's a good proposal that we're trying to put this forward. We think it's the way to preserve this building and keep it in the condition that it should be in, instead of the periodically deteriorated condition it's been in for many, many years. It's on the town, this building's on the town website. Many people have fond memories of it. This is the way it is with most of these historic buildings. We all want to find a way to keep them, but it's usually difficult, if not impossible, to do that. So this proposal attempts to do that. And the proposal is just to change the use for 1 floor of the building. We're changing the use from commercial bakery to 6 small apartments, possibly 5 if we want one of them to be bigger. But, we want an approval. We're asking the Board of Appeals to approve a change of use to small apartments in approximately 2,600 square feet in the second floor of this building. That's the change. The other things that are in there relating to modifications in existing permits, we'd ask for those anyway if we were going to try to do the commercial use in the second floor. But we wouldn't need a variance to do the more intense, use that definitely would have a greater impact on the neighborhood, particularly in terms of truck traffic and parking and that kind of thing, without having to provide a parking plan. So, this isn't a rezoning proposal. We're not asking to rezone this site. We're coming to you for a variance, and the justifications for the variance are, number one, it's a very unusual site. It slopes up steeply to the rear. It's triangular in shape. And it's in a site that has an historic building that occupies most of the site, especially without the right-of-way, almost all of the site. This building was built with no parking. That's the situation with most historic buildings. So some relief to parking requirements in the zoning bylaw in any town is going to be required in order to preserve an historic building. That doesn't mean that you can just do away with parking requirements and say, well, it doesn't matter, you can reuse it, put in a new use, you don't need to put in any parking. We're not trying to do that at all. We're creating a parking plan. We're creating 18 off-street parking spaces. We now have enough room, because the owners now own this right-of-way, to make it wide enough so that you can have two-way traffic. When you go up into the back of the building, because we're removing the back apartment, which had 1,500 square feet already of apartment space, you'll now be able to park, but you'll also be able to turn around and exit forward out of this driveway. This has never been possible before and will not be possible under current conditions if we put pre-existing non-conforming uses back into that second floor. We think this is a substantial improvement, but we are also putting a 7-foot natural cedar fence around the entire parking area and the side seating area. And in addition to that, we're putting in vegetation, trees, arborvitae. And what we brought tonight to help you, yes, well, we have a 3D plan, which is pretty unusual, but I think it does help you visualize what this site could be like. And we also have drawings that we can put up on the easel to show you. I don't know if that's the best way or if it should be
Yeah,
flat.
it should be
But we'd be happy to put it anywhere if anyone wants to come and
No,
look at it.
that looks good. If anybody's having difficulty seeing that, feel free to stand up and walk down here and take a good look at it.
So, these are trees that would be planted. These are trees that will be added to the site. Some of them are existing trees, some of them would be planted.
Tilt it back a bit. That's fine. But-
This is the existing tree line over here, part of it. And this is the proposed fence, the 7-foot fence that Marion was just explaining around the property. And these would be the proposed trees in front of the fence.
So do me a favor and orient me.
Orient.
Yeah.
Here's Pleasant Street.
Would you use the microphone?
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Because I'm sorry, I'm not sure that would pick you up.
No, we wouldn't, yeah. That's okay.
We should have handheld mics for some of these here. It'd probably be easier. Good, thank you.
Pleasant Street. And here's the building, the front of the building here, the existing entrance to the bakery. And then this is the driveway. I'm sure we're all familiar with this site. This is the right-of-way widened to the right-of-way, and this is showing here without the Airbnb apartment. And that which provides, it's really difficult to do it this way. Excuse me. Sorry. This provides the required parking, the 18 spaces. As you can see, I know we had some pushback on, we've all talked about the site and all the potential issues that we thought would come up with the parking and the turnarounds and so on and so forth, but you can clearly see on this plan, it's a pretty simple procedure to back out of a space, pull out this way, come in this way, back in, turn around, come out. And we do have the tandem parking up there that we were all aware of, we talked about before. And so there's 2 spaces here, and then there's a street parking here that I believe was, I'd really like to I want to make sure I'm coordinated with the site engineer in terms of what we talked about in the front. for the striped parking, if there is striped parking out there.
Well, basically, I just want to say on street parking that it's the town's decision what the street parking will be. It's not ours, but we'll do the work required. We've agreed to also install additional storm drain in the street. So we don't know what the street parking marking will be. That's subject to recommendation that's coming from the town engineer. And if there is any other marking or noting on that parking, it's also subject to approval by the Traffic Commission and the Select Board. So that's as good as it gets right now. There'll be some street parking on one side or the other side. The town engineer said he didn't feel it should be on both sides, and because the traffic comes in quickly from Randolph Ave.
We're adding planting on the front of Pleasant Street, in front of the building, on the front elevation edge. That is the outdoor cafe. That's the existing handicap ramp and a walkway that provides access to for the tenants on the second and third floor. And also a delivery door for the bakery, for the existing bakery on the first floor. So I know, again, I know there were concerns about how this parking was going to work, and I believe from this abutter over here, and I just hope that this explains it. You can see how simple, how easy it is. It's all the dimensions work. You can easily pull in, pull out, turn around, come in, come out, whatever you have to do. I don't see, just thought it would be a good way to address some of these concerns. If there's any engineering specifics that you would want to address.
Yeah, I
I'm not
think,
sure. I mean, I'm strictly coming from the the landscaping and aesthetics and some
yeah,
of the-
this is
the
Greg
concerns.
Morse, and I'll go back to wrap up some of my summary of what I feel the Board of Appeals would need to decide, but Greg has been working with us from the beginning. I wasn't here for the last hearing, but he's been updated on what's happened. So since we met with you in December, there have been some updates, nothing dramatic, but some changes to the plan, and that's based on, basically on our meeting with the Planning Board, which was January 3rd. So we had our first site plan review meeting, and we particularly worked on the front of the building, the fact that it needed to be landscaped, and that we needed the handicapped access stairway or ramp, whatever you want to call it, to go right across the front of the building, so that somebody could get out of a car, get on that, and go to the elevator, at the entrance to the cafe and the elevator, which is on the left side of the building. They can also, if they needed to, they can access the outdoor cafe right from that ramp, which makes the entire building completely handicapped accessible. And that took a little work to figure out how to do that, but because of the new landscaping and the fact that what's now outdoor seating in front will be gone, there's quite a bit of space to do this, to put the plantings in and everything. So, did you want to talk a little bit more about some of the measurements and what you were looking at?
Sure.
And you need the, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit all the points on the plan changes that we had made. We had originally talked about changing the curb line along the front here to kind of narrow up the entrance for access into the right-of-way. So we extended the curb line along Pleasant Street with a radius into the site on both sides to really define that driveway back to the back of the site. We had revised some of the parking striping out back, and we have the handicap parking space at the back of the building there, so that we have a total of 18 spaces on the site. We had met with the town's engineer out there to talk about the potential of street improvements in Pleasant Street, and what we've laid out on our plans that will be in front of the town engineer is an additional 4 off-site spaces that are right along the frontage of this. One of those 4 spaces would also be ADA accessible with a new ramp to the sidewalk along Pleasant Street as well. The front of the building where this group of trees is here, that was currently, I believe, a loading zone or a dock into the building. So that would be filled in. There'd be no parking there. You wouldn't be backing onto the street, which is what currently happens at that location. That becomes a new landscaped area. Again, the sidewalk here, we're extending the ramp for handicap access up to the side of the building here. This is where there'd be elevator access to the different levels as well. Those were the summary of the plan changes that we had made.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? So I think I heard you say that this doesn't reflect the apartments. Is that right?
No, it doesn't reflect, this is showing the site.
Yeah, what was referred to is,
It's the removal of the Airbnb apartment that's currently existing in that.
There's a 1,500 square foot apartment
Oh,
in
that's
the rear of the
existing.
building.
Got it.
And that building will, that addition, if we do this proposal, which requires a variance, the use of apartments in the second floor, that apartment would be removed. So
The structure in the
1,500 square
back.
feet of footprint would be
Got it,
removed
got
from
it.
this building.
Got it.
And that's why there's space to do a proper
Park.
turning area in the back of the building and to create some parking spaces.
Understood. Thank you.
So we have drawings of the interior of the building, a lot, I think we have them here, it's similar to what we showed at our last meeting, and we'll put them out, but I just wanted to quickly run through some of the decisions that we're asking the Board of Appeals to make, and particularly I want to talk about the apartment use. The apartment use it requires a variance. This would allow the use of the building's middle floor for small apartments, about 2,600 square feet. That's all. Instead of the pre-existing non-conforming use of the middle floor for a commercial bakery. This allows preservation of the historic exterior, supports the cost of interior renovations in addition to the other uses, and it will create a safe and well-maintained building well into the future, and it will reduce parking demand. 6 small apartments limited to 1 car will require 6 parking spaces. Current zoning for a commercial bakery use in the same square footage as the apartments would require 11 on-site spaces. But it's a pre-existing non-conforming use. It doesn't require a parking plan. So if we were to continue the existing use, we don't necessarily have to renovate the back of this building. We don't have to take down the addition. It just isn't as good a use of this building. It's, at least in my opinion, it's not as good a use. The apartment use also will integrate with and allow continuation of the pre-existing non-conforming office use on the top floor and the permitted bakery, cafe, and the permitted catering kitchen. First of all, any of those employees can live in one of these apartments, should they wish to do so. Any of those employees can use the cafe bakery and the catering, and any of the apartment tenants can use the cafe and the catering, which means that although you have an associated volume of traffic as you think about each of these uses are related to each other, and they may duplicate each other. In other words, you're not necessarily going to have a new car coming for every trip to the cafe, because people who live in this building are going to be using what's already there. And you'll have, in addition, the traffic that you've had to date for the cafe use. We're pretty familiar with that. It's been going on since 1995. And the office use has been going on since 1895. It's just been there for a long time. So what we're suggesting to you is that you could continue the commercial bakery use. It would have greater impact on the neighborhood, and it would not be as interesting. It would certainly be more intrusive. There would be a lot more truck traffic. The building is not going to change, whichever use goes into it. There's still going to be a corner of this building that's right up next to the adjacent house. We know that's an issue. We've heard from the Fowlers, and the way we intend to address it with the apartment application is that we will take the windows out that are on that side of the building. So right now, if you go through this building in the second floor and you look out towards the Fowlers' house, which is on the right, and I think Steve will show you a picture of that, you look right out at rooms inside their home. They bought the house, they knew the building was there, but it's certainly not something that they welcome, I guess. They've certainly said that. So what we proposed, and we did discuss this with Mr. Fowler when he toured the building, we said we thought those 2 windows should be removed on that side of the building. And so there would be no windows looking into his windows in his house.
And that would be this portion of the plan.
And so, because we're taking the back wing off, or would be, it's possible to put new windows in the back. So it's not as if this apartment on this end is gonna have no windows. I mean, there will be light, there will be air crossing. And so, but that's what we're doing to deal with that issue. Yes, well, and then the second thing I want to address with you, which relates to the fact that we have to develop a parking plan for these apartments, is that the parking plan creates fencing and creates a vegetated barrier. The apartments will have leases. The leases will require a minimum of 1-year tenancy. There will be no subleasing allowed. There will be a clause saying that there can be no smoking in back of the building, certainly no smoking inside the building. There'll probably be some kind of designated smoking area in front of the building, mainly because with a commercial use, you have to do something like that. And that the leases would also say no pets, and that they, that they could not, that tenants cannot have more than one car at this building, park at this building. So these are provisions that we put in our plan, and most of them were in there to begin with, because we anticipated that this would be an issue. There's no screening, and there's no fencing right now around any of the back or the sides of the building, and the driveway. And it seems obvious that it would be better to create some privacy for the neighbors. So that's been part of this proposal from the beginning. We're also asking for a special permit under Section 4 because to allow a change in use, the building commissioners told us you also need a special permit, but the standard for the special permit basically is incorporated into what would be required to issue a variance. I've already listed for you some of the factors in the site that would help justify a variance. They include the shape of the lot, the topography of the lot, and the existing historic building, which was built with no parking at all. So in order to create any parking area around this building, you need some flexibility in the setback restrictions for parking zoning requirements. Parking will be substantially improved from current conditions, which are that most parking is on the street. In 1995, when the Board of Appeals approved the special permit for the cafe, the owners showed a plan with 9 angle parking spaces on the right-of-way, which at that time they didn't own, or at least nobody seemed to know, who had a right to use it. That was discussed in 2009 with the Board of Appeals when the apartment application came in. The Board of Appeals recommended that the owner go to land court and resolve that. He wasn't able to do it, I'm sure, for financial reasons, but the Falcones have since taken care of that and have resolved the ownership issue. But in any case, because it was angle parking and because there wasn't two-way passage on that driveway, people didn't use it. We all parked in the street. And that meant that parking on the street was more congested then and has been for the last 20 years than it will be under this proposal, because this proposal provides off-street parking for these uses. I have a long list of improvements that we will make as a result of this proposal. We'll increase the area for on-site parking by demolishing the back wing and widening the right-of-way, installing a 7-foot-high cedar fence, installing vegetated screening, constructing 18 on-site parking spaces meeting size regulations, 1 handicap space off-street, a parking design providing turning room for cars, 1 designated parking space per apartment, lease restrictions relating to no more than 1 car, 6 on-site spaces that can be designated for employees. That would be the tandem parking in the rear, a stormwater receptacle in the driveway, a new second storm drain in Pleasant Street, dark sky compliant security lighting in the parking area designed so as not to shine on adjacent properties, which is a requirement of the planning board, on-site parking located in the rear away from nearby residences. I have a plan here. If you don't mind, could you just hand that over to them? This is just an aerial view of the site. And on that aerial view, we've had the engineer mark the distance between this site and nearby residences. So
Anybody
you can
wants to
see-
look at this?
And there are extra copies if anyone would like one. This is simply to demonstrate, you know, how close or how far the parking will be from actual residential properties. The parking design does require a variance for parking area setbacks because part of the parking now is being created in this right-of-way, and it's a 30-foot wide right-of-way. So in that narrow extended area, which is now part of the property, we've proposed the tandem parking spaces for employees. Only for employees, and then the next two, this is what we discussed with the planning board, by the way, which is how to organize the parking. The next two parking spaces after the tandem spaces would also be employee parking spaces. That's because these spaces require coordination in order to be used. And there are tandem parking spaces at Novara Restaurant in East Milton. They were required in the permitting processes there, and they increase the capacity of the parking area, basically, and they have worked. The closest setback requested is the rear of the parking lot. Our parking bylaws require that we observe residential setback, well, a setback of 20 feet for parking in a residential area. There is no residential use at the rear of this lot, and Gregory Zazula, who is the owner of all of that property to the rear, supports this application. He took a tour of the site. He was very clear in his support. He hasn't written a letter, but I'm very confident in reporting to you that he supports it. The other setback relief requested is on either side of that narrow strip. We can only provide 2.5 feet, but we're providing fencing and we're providing vegetated screening. Then as you get closer to the building, there's a fairly long length that goes along the Fowler's backyard. That has an 8-foot setback. The zoning bylaws would require 10. We need the turning room and the parking space area, but because of the fence and the screening, we feel that this will be not, this parking area will not be visible to neighbors, and it's a good plan. And under the circumstances, because of the historic building and the restrictions of the site, we feel that you should grant relief for that setback. In addition to these variances and the one for a sign, which is one that you've encountered in other applications, in a residential district in Milton, a commercial sign is not permitted, or no sign is permitted. And so no permanent signs. And so in order to have a sign at a building like this on a pre-existing non-conforming use site, you have to, and if you want to replace the existing sign, which we would be doing here, we have to apply for a new variance for the sign. So that's the other variance we're requesting. We are requesting modifications of special permits for catering and for the cafe. The catering would be moved from the second floor to the first floor. Because the first permit was tied to a plan that showed it on the second floor, we need an amendment in order to move it to the first floor. That's just a catering kitchen. The cafe special permit would require amendment because, again, the space is being reorganized, but also because what we want to do, now that we'll have enough space, is to provide 16 seats indoors when the outdoor seating is not being used. This doesn't increase the seating capacity. But like some of the restaurants in East Milton, the outdoor seating can only be used, if you're using outdoor seating, you can't use the indoor seating. You can only occupy 16 seats at a time. That would require an amendment to the original special permit. And finally, we're requesting an amendment to the original cafe special permit to allow Sunday hours from 7:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Owners over the years have had requests. St. Elizabeth's parishioners, just for example, have asked why we can't have the cafe open in the mornings on Sunday. The hours possibly could be, we don't know who will be operating this cafe. This will be a tenant. But we're asking to have that option available. We don't know how the hours would be arranged. Possibly they might not want to be open another morning if they're open on Sunday. Possibly they might decide after trying it, there aren't enough customers and it's not worth doing. But that's a final amendment that we're requesting. What the Board of Appeals does not have to do is, you don't have to decide that long list of things that the planning board has to look at that relate to specifics of site plan, the site plan, things like drainage, the topography, the turning radius of the parking spaces. You need to decide that we've adequately provided for the new use, and I believe that includes some determination of parking adequacy for this apartment use. The office use in the top floor of the building does not require any zoning relief. It's a pre-existing non-conforming use. And as I've told you, the existing tenant is going to continue, is very interested in continuing to have his office there, and even was formerly the owner of the building. So, I know we're gonna hear more from neighbors tonight. We have listened to the neighbors. We believe that this plan, with the conditions that would be in any leases for these apartments, and with the improvements to the site, will be a net improvement in this building, in addition to the fact that this is a plan that preserves an historic building and provides enough revenue to keep it in good condition in the future. So we hope that you will consider granting the relief that we've requested, and we hope that, we look forward to hearing from everybody who's here.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you,
Thank you.
Mrs. McEttrick. Let me ask you, Mr. Alves, do you have any questions of Mrs. McEttrick?
I do.
Please.
Let's start with the item you just mentioned, the third floor office use.
Yes. What
That's
is,
that's leased currently. There's no provisions in the lease for any dedicated parking spaces for that tenant?
no. In fact, I mean, the person who's leasing the space now was the owner of the building, so, I mean, he has a software business. He has 4 employees.
How many people are there? 4?
Happy to answer any questions.
He's a resident.
Can you identify yourself, sir, and
If you wouldn't mind coming up, because no one can hear you.
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Why don't you tell us your name and address, sir?
Sure. My name is Jeffrey Upton. I live at 324 Reedsdale Road, which is about 2 blocks from the location. I've lived there for 20 years and been visiting Bent's Cookie Factory
Just
all
as
that
long.
time.
Mr. Alves, do you have
Yeah,
any
so-
questions?
I was looking at the numbers. So 18 total parking spaces, 6 dedicated to employees, 6 for the micro apartments.
Unless we have 5 rather than.
Or 5, or
still
5.
under
But none dedicated specifically to the tenant who uses the office space on the top floor.
Employee, those would be employee spaces.
No, 6 for employees, 6 or 5 for apartment use, right? And what I'm asking is, any of the remaining spots dedicated to the folks who will
We
be,
consider those employee spaces to be,
Thank
okay,
you very much.
potentially could be used by those.
could you doubly?
Yes. I mean, that's how we think of them, that's what that means, but, you
And
know,
it, no, I understand. And there's only one tenant on the top floor?
yeah,
Yes.
it's Boomwriter, it's a software company. They write software. It's all open space on the top floor with laptops and whatever. Yeah.
So one more kind of a technical question, and I agree with you that if the board were inclined to grant the use variance, we may not need the section 4 change of use. One seems to be lesser included in the other. But can you explain to me how we get there in section 4? Because section 4 speaks to a use that's similar, substantially similar to the former, or the one previously used prior to the change. Are we certain that we need a relief under section 4?
No, I mean, that was the building commissioner. I would have thought that if you're applying for a variance for a use, the point of a variance is it's
Right.
not allowed by the zoning bylaws, that you don't need a special permit under section 4. But he included that in his letter, so I've included it in my application, and I'd ask the board to consider also granting it, just, that is, if they are going to grant the variance relief, just to cover all the bases. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the rationale is, but that's what he had requested.
I couldn't get there, but okay.
I know, well, whatever.
Yeah, understood. So is the planning, let me restate what I think I heard you say. Does the need for the micro apartments is to help support this project. Revenues is gonna come from those tenants. Is a tenant board, the planning board gonna inquire into sort of the expected revenue stream? I mean, we've heard a lot about this, but there's been no evidence on any.
No, but I'm not saying in this application that the only way to use the second floor is for apartments.
Okay,
What I'm saying is that we've studied applications and uses, and we feel the lowest impact use is for the apartments. And I'm not saying that there couldn't be a revenue stream from a commercial bakery on the second
could.
floor. In fact, there are several companies that would really like to move into this space and run a commercial bakery. So that's what's the most likely result, this is just that's just a fact, that's what would be likely to happen on that second floor. Although it's the historic use, and it's the pre-existing non-conforming use that's permitted, it didn't seem to us that it was the best use for the neighborhood.
and the applicant would agree to all the conditions you've outlined on the leases for the space?
Yes,
At least a year, all those restrictions?
yes.
Okay. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. O'Brien?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I don't have any questions at this time. Do you have any other evidence you'd like to,
Not at this time, and do you want me to move so that people can sit here, because we've covered up the whole
that
table?
probably would be nice. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Upton.
Yes.
All right, this is the public comment part of this particular application. So is there anybody here present who wishes to speak in support of this application? Okay. Mr. Upton, well, come on, you have to, no, I'm sorry.
Microphone.
You're gonna be on the mic. I'm sorry, they'll come down and chastise me for not having you in the right spot.
Beg your pardon. So, I'm
Just
sorry.
introduce yourself again.
Sure, yes. Jeffrey Upton, 324 Reedsdale Road. I've lived in Milton at that address for 20 years and have, during that period, walked to Bent Cookies Factory for lunch and coffee. It's just an important part of the Milton community. Having represented the prior operator of the bakery there, Kiwi Bakery Company, I know that just that bakery cannot support the expenses of the building. Having represented the prior owner of the entire building, Chris Twyman, I also know that just operating a bakery out of that front portion of the building cannot support the expenses of the building. Chris Twyman, my client, so I can speak on his behalf, did not want or need to sell the building. He sold it to Mr. Falcone because Mr. Falcone represented that he was going to preserve the building, which was so important to Mr. Twyman. The only way that the building can function is if there is enough income to cover its expenses, that just the cafe will not do it. The proposal that Mr. Falcone has made, I think, will allow Bent's Cookie Factory to come back to life and operate, helping the town. And I'm very, very much in favor of it.
Great, thank you, Mr. Upton, we appreciate. Mr. Walsh, do you want to be heard? Please.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for the service you do to the town. The three of you are all volunteer service, and I'm familiar with that as well. I won't repeat what I had in my email with you, but my name is Brian Walsh. I live at 56 Pleasant Street, which is 7 houses down from Bent's on the left. My wife and I, Laura, have lived there since 1985. We raised our 3 children in that neighborhood. And frankly, Bent's has always been it's sort of been a focal point of the neighborhood for us. Someone around town would say, "Where do you live?" Well, I live right down the street from Bent's. It was an easy way to say it. I got an invitation in the mail to come and visit an open house to describe what was going on in the project. I went down and did that. I had never met Bob Falcone before then. I've seen him around town, but I hadn't met him. I know his sister, Jeannie Schmidt Falcone, rather well. Her children were the same age as mine and started in grammar school, I think, around 86 or 87 down in Cunningham, so knew her for a long time. Solid family, good people, good intentions, and I was quite impressed, my wife and I both, when we toured the building with their plans. As a business person, I own my own business, I have an MBA, I recognize the fact that, you know, buildings don't take care of themselves. That if you want to preserve a building like Bent's, and I think the town of Milton should, you have to have a practical business plan that will afford to maintain that building. Quite frankly, right next door, for many years, it was a good example of what happens with decay and an active business is not there. There was a small old store that practically imploded. I was surprised the town hadn't torn it down much sooner. And we want to see Bent survive. The plan that's there is very appealing to my wife and I. We think 6 micro apartments, 6 cars, and by the way, I don't want to get into the whole traffic thing, but everyone that lives in Milton recognizes, and certainly us over the last 30-plus years, have seen a dramatic increase in traffic, and on our little section of Pleasant Street, it's been pretty dramatic. So I think the use of just 6 these micro apartments with somebody in there maybe leaving in the morning and coming back at night is a minimal amount of traffic adding on to an already huge amount of traffic. And I think it would be worse if that whole building were a full-blown factory, or excuse me, a bakery, where potentially, you know, lots of trucks were leaving to deliver product to customers early in the morning, et cetera. So I know that change is difficult. I know that everyone has property rights, including the Falcones. And I just think, and my wife and I agree on this, we think it's a solid plan, good property rights. When I attended the open house, it was the first time I met Bob Falcone. And I would say my wife and I were there for about an hour and a half. We did an extensive walk around that building and talked to them about where the plans were, what was going where. Coincidentally, I did receive some mailings from a neighbor and spoke to the gentleman that lives right next to the Bent's factory, and he expressed his real concern for his window being within 4 feet and looking in a window of one of those micro apartments. So coincidentally, yesterday, I was with another member of the Fire Building Committee and I meeting with Mr. Falcone to discuss the East Milton Fire Station and some options down in East Milton. And I took advantage of the opportunity after that business was done to say, you know, Bob, one of my neighbors has moved in there, has a real concern. And he made it crystal clear to me that he would eliminate those windows so there would be no window-looking window, and I know that was touched upon. So netted out, I think the Falcones are the kind of people that you want operating a facility like this. I think their plan is solid. I welcome them. We've been there since 1985, and God only knows how many more years we'll be there, but I'll be delighted to see this project move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh,
Thank
we
you, Mr. Walsh.
appreciate it. Yes, sir.
I'm the chairman of the Historical Commission. Would you have a place for me to?
No, we're delighted to hear from you.
Because I wanted to address some of the concerns.
That's fine.
My name's Steve Tedesco, and I'm speaking
Speak right into the mic, Mr.
as
Tedesco.
you know, I've been observing this whole process for several weeks, and we've been at this hearing before, and as chairman of the Linfield Historical Commission, I just wanted to share my feelings with this project, and if we had a project, I mean, if we had a project like this in Linfield, we would greet it with open arms, because it's a great opportunity to take an old building, to reuse an old building, to bring it life to an old building, and breathe life into it, and and keep, preserve it. And I was so delighted when Bob Falcone approached me and asked me if I wanted to get involved with this. And I said, geez, I thought it was a wonderful opportunity. And to preserve an old building like this, and it has great character, and as you can see, a lot of the work has already been done on the facade, with exception to on the left corner up on the roof, you can see the elevator overrun. There's a little head house for the elevator. But besides that, it's pretty much just as it exists. And, but, I wanted to, as on the Linfield Commission, we come across this a lot. We have opposition, and, it concerns me, and I understand, I understand where the opposition comes from, and I understand the concerns, and we, as the commission, we like to work with people in the community and work through these issues and address them, and do what we can to make sure, to at least attempt to make a project like this work and have everybody happy with it and comfortable with it, what came out of it was we looked at the different uses, the possible uses. As you know, we are proposing these micro units, and I think that I heard the last meeting. The micro units was sort of, I think it was misconstrued to be, I heard the term, is this going to be a boarding house? Well, it's not a boarding house. We all know what a boarding house is. I'm sure the history of a boarding house, the boarding houses were back in the 1800s, and it was 10 people living in one building and sharing one bath and one kitchen and all that. And certainly we don't have that here. They're all modern kitchens and appliances and washer and dryers and so on and so forth. So the units are, they're just as modern as any other unit, any other kind of a building. But I see the opportunity there for, we have six units. And I know there's a concern about, well, do we want, there's noise from these people, it could be potential noise, there could be additional traffic, there could be all kinds of things. And these are the common issues that come up with these types of projects that we deal with. And I understand that, being on the commission, but, my response to that is, well, look, you have this wonderful building, you have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. It's a residential, it purely speaks as a residential building. It has all of the architectural components that makes it, I see it fitting very comfortably on the street. And to have a, there was some talk about putting a commissary there or something like that. It just doesn't seem like a good fit. And I thought that, gee, it'd be great to have, 5 units, 6 units, or whatever. And it's pretty clear that the parking works, all the parking works. There's plenty of parking. I think we can all see from the site plan that the cars can turn around and park and meet all of those, deal with all of those kinds of things. But, I heard that, and then, I was listening to some of the feedback. We could hear people talking and some of the tenants, and then tenants have parties, tenants have, well, I mean, these are communities. This is the way communities work. I mean, we have friends. We have interaction with other people. We talk. And I understand the concerns, but it's part of. I mean, we see it as part of. It's just part of the community. The way it develops, the way it grows, and it's just the way we interact with people. And there's people living in there. They may come downstairs and communicate. I mean, some of the neighbors may sit down and. You may meet someone in the, in the cafe, and they may end up being your best friend for life. Who knows? So, but again, I understand the concerns. Because anytime we were faced with a project like this, the talking point seemed to come out as there's going to be crime, there's going to be noise, there's going to be traffic, and I don't see that happening here. I really don't. I think this is it's a wonderful opportunity to have this historical building fit in the neighborhood. If I lived in that neighborhood, I would love something like this because it brings back something that wasn't there before. And I was looking at 4 years ago, when we first looked at this project, I was looking at a dilapidated building. And I certainly would welcome with open arms having something like this put in front of us. And say, geez, that's great. It's great for my property value. It's great for the neighborhood. It fulfills a housing need maybe in the town of Milton. And you know, again, you know, if you go through the drawings, I mean, it has a very nice residential feel to it. The scale is just right. I mean, that's the rear elevation, that's the new rear elevation that faces the back property. So that's with the apartment that was there now, the Airbnb that's missing. And then everything else is in scale with the neighborhood. So again, you know, I understand the concerns, and, you know, I'm looking forward to hearing them, you know, talking about them tonight again. But I just wanted to say that I see it as a great opportunity to have this building fit into a neighborhood. It's such a good residential feel to it. And I think once it's done, if it goes in this route, I really think it's gonna help the whole neighborhood aesthetically. I think it's gonna help it will definitely help with the property values, I would think, in the future. And also, I think it would be a great place to have next door, you know, where you could walk in and, you know, hang out and meet people. So I'm speaking as, you know, from the historical commission standpoint. But believe me, I understand the concerns, and I thought we made a presentation here last week that people would appreciate and may want to look at it and say, well, that could be something nice in the neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Finisco, we appreciate it. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak in favor of this application? Mr. Clark, are you
Yes.
approaching the witness stand?
Whoa, yes.
We're not going to sway you.
No.
Why don't you tell us your name and address so we have a clear record?
William Clark, I'm the planning director for the town, I'm also a town resident, 116 Ridgewood Road. There are several different committees in town that have taken on the issue under our master plan that save the character of our neighborhoods, save our view sheds, and then increase property values. Historic preservation has high costs. The apartments and the alternative housing styles that this kind of a project brings can provide that necessary type of funding. The other part to this is the type of housing that we're talking about is less intrusive to a residential neighborhood than the commercial the commercial that is there, the commercial that can be there, the commercial that would be there should it not be passed. The Historic Commission's been before this group before, this board before, talking about historic preservation of old buildings. If we don't save these old buildings, we usually wind up having a house torn down, multiple houses put into its place. Some of the examples would be the Women's Club. Take down the Women's Club, we put up four houses, and everybody goes, whoa, how did all those houses fit on such a small lot? Well, that's what the neighbors asked for. But other things that we could do. And I think that looking at the style of housing that's being proposed does fit that bill. We have lots of seniors who are saying, we want to get rid of our house. We're not looking for such a big footprint. We're looking for a smaller footprint. We're not looking for a year-round house. We're looking for a landing spot, whether that landing spot is for a short-term or long-term. I know that before the planning board, there's a minimum time rental period for these units, which is good. They're not short-term rentals. The other part is there are a lot of site plan issues that the apartments bring to this site that have to do with parking, with landscaping, with drainage. They've agreed to take in, the current storm drain is actually on their property and it doesn't catch what's in the street. So they're working with the town engineer to put that storm drain where it's supposed to be. They're looking at doing stormwater capturing on site, try to infiltrate it into the ground so it doesn't have to go into that storm drain. There's other things to this that are, there's a bike rack in here. There's more pedestrian usage of the property as proposed right here. And I think that when you have the residential, you have, it will be quieter. Two, there are no, the nighttime shift is a lot quieter. I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Great, thank you, Bill, appreciate it. Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard in support of this application? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth McGrail. I live at 44 Pleasant Street. I support the project not only because of the feeling Bent's gives you when you drive around the corner onto Pleasant Street. It's basically looking out 10 years from now, the infrastructure in the whole, off of Randolph Ave, everywhere. This is coming regardless. Boston's growing. It's a growing city, and Milton is going to be part of that growth. And to have that kind of community feel, and I feel like everybody has like a bad rap on the feeling that it's going to give. I see it as a cleaner, greener, community-based place where, yeah, you go to the cafe and have coffee and meet your neighbor, and hopefully they're biking more and healthy options to eat. Yeah, no, I see it as such a plus for our neighborhood because I see the whole infrastructure of the neighborhood around it changing eventually. So I think it's a great fit to stay.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you very much, Mrs. McGrail. Anybody else who'd like to be heard in support of this application? Okay, so the record indicates there's no other person. Does anybody want to speak in opposition to this application?
1 second before you say that, I'm sorry. Is there a middle?
A middle? Oh, of course there is, but we haven't heard a middle yet, but if,
Yeah, I don't want to.
Okay.
Talk to you about some points that I have in concern. I've met with Bob, so
okay, that's fair. Why don't we do this?
at the end or no?
No, let me ask, is there anybody who has a middle position here? And I think I say a hand. Come on up, that's fine. Would you like it, Tim? Well, it,
I don't know, I just don't want, you know.
no, we're delighted to have you here. Just,
Well, yeah. So my name is Ann Smataski. I live at 18 Pleasant Street. I have lived there since.
I'm sorry, would you spell your last
Oh.
name, please?
S as in
And we're
Sam.
challenged, go slow. S as in Sam,
I-E,
I-E,
M as in Mary,
yes,
I-A,
I-A,
T-K,
T-K,
A-S, right?
A-S,
K-A.
K-A, and that's, did you say Mary or Nancy?
Ann,
Okay,
whatever works.
you mind, well, you got me all confused with
Please,
your last
Ann.
name.
Ann is
May we call
preferable.
you Ann?
Please. Please do.
Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you for having us.
Go ahead.
So I live at 18 Pleasant,
Yeah.
and which is directly right across the street from, oh, thanks, babe. And this is JP.
Hi, JP.
We live together.
How you doing?
Great.
So I've been there since 2000.
Yep.
My family has been there for at least 50 years, but prior to that, my great aunt owned the house, my godmother. So I grew up with Bent's. So I don't know if anybody really can say that nobody wants it not to be preserved. I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't think that's the problem with what it is. I think that everybody wants it to be preserved and look nice. And what you've talked about, Bob, I mean, it looks nice. I don't see issues with what it looks like. I don't think that's what it is. I decided to call Bob prior to all the meetings because I wanted to chat with him one-on-one. I thought that would be easier. And he met with me that same week, which was great. So I was very anxious, very nervous, very stressed about the whole project. And I told you, everything I'm saying now is what I've said to everybody. So I said, you know what, I'm having such anxiety over this whole project with the 6 apartments, and I don't know what's gonna happen. Is it gonna be crazy? Am I gonna not be at peace anymore? I'm not gonna, they're gonna be up at night, I'm not gonna be able to sleep, anything that runs through your head about 6 new people living across the street from you that are not owning. So he talked to me about a few things, which was the no pets, the no smoking, which was definitely helpful. So there's some points that I have that I have questions on still. It doesn't mean that they can't be fixed or addressed. I just want to talk about them. I think that we all need to be protected, obviously. We live there. I want to be happy. I want to stay. So one of my items, well, someone actually said something about smoking. So I know there's no smoking in the apartments, but they said no smoking permitted in or behind. So where would that be? In front of the building, in front of my house? So that's kind of threw me off. So I would love to know.
I thought there was supposed to be a designated spot.
Yeah, I'd like to know where that would be.
Near at Bent's, where the commerce is taking place.
Yeah, I just want to know where that would be so that I can know. Because currently now, someone does actually kind of stand in front of the house sometimes and do that.
That's an excellent question. Does any of the, Mr.
Do we know?
Falcone, or any one of your engineers want to address that?
I'm not quite sure if we've actually found a designated smoking spot.
Okay.
You really can't say 50 feet from any door, like some laws that say, that they want to just go outside on a rainy day. You can't say no smoking on the site, you can't do that, that would be against the law.
Not
Or
sharing.
That's against someone's right.
When
We
Bent's
own
was
probably
open,
20
when it was
30
open,
different locations.
I'm sorry, when Bent's was open, was there a designated
No,
smoking area?
No, there was a cigarette, but
Receptacle?
Pole
they
or
just
whatever.
kept
one of the-
all the doors
Yeah,
to put them out, to dispose of the
Right.
cigarette.
okay.
I'm just wondering, because someone mentioned it tonight, so I don't know who, I can't remember who mentioned it, but
It's a
someone
very-
said that.
We don't allow smoking in our apartments, in any of our apartments. We don't allow pets in any of our apartments.
Mhm.
We enforce the smoking law to the extent of the law. We cannot, they won't smoke in the apartments, there's no balconies. They can't smoke in any public area. So they are allowed to go outside and smoke. I mean, they can smoke in the street, if it's not against the law. We can find a spot, I'm not sure how it works.
Mr. Clark, do you have any idea as to what the either local or state regulations are with respect to smoking? No, well, that's
Who mentioned that?
that's a matter that needs to be resolved.
I didn't think about it really. Someone mentioned it tonight. I thought they were sitting here when they mentioned it. And so I'm like, oh, I wonder where that would be then. So I'd love to know, I guess, where that would be if that's something that is gonna be done. I just wanna be kept up to date on things.
And that may be something that the planning board is going to address
Okay.
at the next meeting. I think it's February 14th? Yeah, so maybe that's something that
Okay.
the planning board, they'd probably know that code, because Mrs. Tugayas, who's the chairman of the board, is a registered architect, so that
Okay.
she probably could answer that for you.
Right.
Okay.
And obviously with the butts, the smoking and the trash, stuff like that, you have told me that because I was concerned about trash, and you had said that I shouldn't have to worry about that because you have men coming, maybe twice a week, plus the people at the bakery will be
So
taking
they-
care of it. So that's what you've said you'll do, so I'm not concerned with that. It's just more, someone mentioned it.
What do you have
Um,
next?
And then, the notes. So we've also talked about this, the snow plowing. So I want to know now, I'm thinking a little bit more about it. Where is all this snow going to be put? I want to make sure it's not being pushed up against my fence or my area of my house.
Well, it was 12 the other day, did they?
I actually didn't go out for like 3
Okay, well, they
days.
didn't.
So this
They've
is like,
been
I haven't
told
gone out
that,
at
and
all.
we
Okay,
discussed that last year.
but where, no, we talked about that. Yeah, right, we talked about that just the last time me and you met, actually. Which was what, maybe a month ago or so?
Yeah.
I want to know in general where the snow's being put. And we didn't actually discuss
It's
that.
gonna go in the setback areas between the driveway and the fence. When it gets extra heavy, there were.
On your property?
Yes.
Okay,
can't
we
put
didn't
it-
talk about that.
We can't put it anywhere on else's property.
Well, I just wanted to be sure.
Yeah, well, that's.
I think that was a pretty
we wouldn't be
reasonable
able to do that.
question to
Yeah,
where the snow
That's
goes.
another issue that
Yeah,
wouldn't,
that's not a Board of Appeals.
it wouldn't be a
issue.
zoning issue, it's more of a,
Right.
it's a land use
I'm-
issue.
I'm just
for the
somebody who
planning
lives
board.
there, so I have questions, so I didn't,
That's all right, that's a legitimate question.
Thank you.
It should be answered.
I appreciate that.
And on the 14th, you can speak to our friends at the planning board.
Thank you, okay. Well, because, right, because in the middle of the night, exactly. And I've been sick, been passed out, so I haven't really been affected much, but, right, we had middle of the night, the plowing and the beeping and the noise, sometimes it keeps us up quite a lot, and I know one of our other neighbors had said the same thing, so I did mention that to you, so we did talk about that, we were trying to figure out like what we could do to, maybe not have that happen at 2:30 and 3 in the morning, so.
Right, this type of commercial plowing. But I'll
Yeah.
tell you, in this last storm, just an example, it must have been 3 o'clock in the morning. I was awakened. I'm living in my house. I'm asleep in bed, and I was awakened.
Oh, not the town ones.
By the plows. on
Oh,
the
yeah, no,
street.
not those.
I understand that, but so
Yeah,
that's.
they're different ones than the plows in the street. Those,
know.
it's the back and forth with the
Okay.
beeping.
I hear you.
Yeah.
It's like my case, I work day and night, and when I wanna sleep, I cannot sleep, because they be all night.
Yeah.
That's the only thing.
Just a little piece,
It's
so, I
more
mean,
complaint than anything.
Okay.
I know it's a beautiful building. 100%
no one's
sure.
saying it's not, so.
Okay.
And then you talk about parking, so they talked about parking either on one side or the other side of the street, so I guess at some point when they figure that out, I'd like to know how that works.
Right.
Because when I try to back out of the driveway, I need to be able to see, because that street is awful in general. So it's been actually very, it hasn't been so bad because nothing's really been going on over there, but, when it starts to get busy again, it's just on both sides, sometimes it's hard. And let me just see what else I had on here. Oh, someone said something, and just kind of a little bell in my head, a test of small apartments. I don't know if anybody else kind of caught up on that when they were talking about, oh, this would be a great idea to test out these kind of apartments in Milton.
Well, I think they meant this may be the first version
A test
of the
run.
micro
Right.
apartments. And the
Right.
question is where they're gonna go first, and they're being
Yeah, a
proposed
test,
here
yeah,
first.
like so it just sounded kind of off-putting, but, so I'm not against the building being, the bakery, I love the bakery. I am looking forward to having the bakery back again, so that's why I'm saying I'm not really against it all, but I have concerns, and I want to make sure that, since I live there, that they're, taken care of, or about it, or if whatever you're planning to do to make sure that we're all happy, I'm aware of, that's all. And then the Sunday, open on Sunday, and I've mentioned this to you as well, Bob, that Sunday morning, it'd be nice to have one day of the week when there's not like 100 people outside of your window, so you can sleep maybe once. 7:30 is a little early. I'm not, later would be nice, but it would be nice to have one day
Okay, great.
to rest.
Okay.
So, that's
Thank
my
you.
thoughts. Okay.
That's great. I can tell you that as part of any decision, if we were to grant this variance, we always tie in to the site plan review conditions of the planning board
Mm-hmm.
to make the documents fit together and be enforceable together.
Yeah.
So, thank you for your middle.
I hope you've
your
taken this
middle
in a
position.
positive way.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Let me just ask, is there anybody else out there who perhaps has a middle position and wants to say something? Okay, so we have no middle position people. Is there anybody out there who wishes to speak in opposition to this application? Sir, yes, sir. And ma'am, excuse me, I didn't realize you were together.
How you doing?
We're doing, actually, it's been a long day
You guys
for
gonna
me,
be able
but
to stay awake
otherwise we're-
for this?
Otherwise, we're doing well.
Welcome to the Board of
Yeah.
Appeals.
Why don't you introduce yourselves, name and address, please?
Jerry Fowler. It's my wife Sarah.
Oh, sure. You spoke at the last hearing.
I was not at the last hearing.
You
no.
weren't.
I was at the planning
We
board.
spoke at the planning board.
Oh,
We
that-
didn't- yeah, we didn't make
okay.
it. We didn't make it to the last Board of Appeals.
That, I saw the planning board tape, and so that's why you look so familiar.
We were
Great.
there for a little while.
You
Yeah,
were
yeah.
there for a little while.
Um,
I'm sorry, it's Jerry, and what's your name?
Sarah.
Sarah, okay, where do you live?
672 Randolph Avenue. That's the one that's 4 feet away
Yeah.
from the
Sure,
factory.
okay. That's why you were so familiar to me. Great, we're delighted to hear from you.
All right. So I write everything down. I apologize, but I'm going to be reading. If I don't write it down, I'll start here and I'll end up over here.
Whatever makes you comfortable.
Whatever works. All right. So I'm Jerry. This is my wife Sarah. I'm a firefighter. My wife works for an education nonprofit. It's nice to meet you guys.
Good, where are you a firefighter?
In Stoughton.
Stoughton, congratulations, that's
Close by.
great.
Not far. My wife Sarah and I, we live with our 3 daughters. We have 2 6-year-old twins and 1 2-year-old next door at 672 Randolph Avenue, immediately to the right of the GH Bent factory at 7 Pleasant Street. Our house was the residence of the original Bent family, and the 2 buildings, our house and the factory, were they're 4 feet apart, and they actually used to be connected by a walkway. So we purchased our house and property in August 2015 after living in apartments in both the Dorchester and Jamaica Plain neighborhoods of Boston. After a long process of saving money and searching for the right fit, we decided to move to Milton for its strong family-oriented community and good schools. We were thrilled when we found our house at 672 Randolph Ave with its character, rich history, and quiet yard and back, which was well removed from busy Randolph Ave. We've invested a lot of time and money over the last 3.5 years renovating and making the house into a home that we love. As direct abutters with a property that is extremely and uniquely close to the factory, we have several issues with the proposed plan and requested variances by Falcone Properties. In Ms. McKettrick's letter to this board, dated November 6, 2018, under Section G, Standards for Relief Requested, it references the standards for modifying a pre-existing non-conforming use by special permit are in General Law 40A, Section 6, and in the Milton zoning bylaws, Section 4, which reads, "The Milton zoning bylaws allow the modification of a pre-existing non-conforming use by special permit, provided the use is not more detrimental to the neighborhood and is consistent with the intent of the zoning bylaws." When we bought our property over 3 years ago, we understood there had been a couple non-conforming uses by special permit issued for the neighboring property. We were happy to have the cafe next door, and we were quick, consistent customers. The apartment we knew was there, what everyone's been calling it the Airbnb, we knew it was there, and we were okay with just the 1 residence. We never anticipated that Milton would consider modifying this non-conforming use by special permit for such as what Falcone is proposing. Not only will the proposed use be detrimental to us and the other neighbors in the neighborhood, but it will make this property's use much more inconsistent with the intent of the zoning bylaws. This area is zoned residential C, not for business or multifamily use. The changes proposed will negatively affect us in many ways. The requested variance for 6 apartments, all of which cannot have a maximum occupancy less than 2 people, will surely increase traffic, noise, and other activity, and increase it in a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week way that differs from the business uses in the rest of the building. The special building for the apartment built in 2009 was granted for an owner-occupied situation, and after the owner sold it, the apartment was used as a short-term rental Airbnb for years, which speaks to the need for this board to consider the long-term effects of granting variances like this. With just the 1 apartment, residents tend to congregate in the current parking lot space as there is no other designated outdoor space for residents on the small lot, which is highly problematic for obvious reasons, and it's obvious to conclude that this will increase 6-fold with the proposed plan of adding on 5 more residences. Demolishing the 1 apartment and creating 6 new ones is certainly inconsistent with the current zoning and also with the grounds on which the 2009 special permit was granted. Furthermore, regarding the parking, the plan calls for changing the required 10-foot side setback to our property to 2.5 feet, and the rear setback from the required 20 feet to 0 feet, which means the parking lot will wrap around our narrow adjacent backyard where our 3 daughters and their friends play. The additional noise, air pollution, and vehicle traffic will be particularly bothersome to us and very detrimental to the rest of the neighborhood. Last week, at 7:30 a.m. on Tuesday, I filmed the northbound traffic on Randolph Ave and Pleasant Street for 5 minutes. In those 5 minutes, 66 cars turned onto Pleasant Street at a high rate of speed, which equates to 13 cars a minute, or about 1 car every 4 seconds. And this is with nothing other than the office and the catering space currently open in the building. This proposed change in use for the 7 Pleasant Street will compound the traffic in the neighborhood dramatically. With as many additional vehicles as will be in this area to make this business venture work, all stopping and going around this multi-use facility. It can only result in more accidents, illegal parking, and much more danger in the area for pedestrians, all of which makes granting these proposed variances very detrimental to the entire neighborhood. And just a sidebar, the police log is public record. 10% of the accidents last year in Milton were on Randolph Ave. And that's a statistic that anybody
Well,
can.
we're familiar with that. Could I ask you one question, though?
Yes.
I don't understand. When you said 66 cars were coming around.
From Randolph onto Pleasant.
Yeah, onto Pleasant Street.
Yes.
Were they weren't stopping at Bent's?
No.
But
Ben-
just-
It was just, you're
Yeah.
just talking about
Already
traffic.
really,
The
it's already really
cut-through.
busy, yeah.
the
Okay.
cut through.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to give some context for an already.
Yeah, for a cafe that's not open
Well, busy.
or
yeah.
residential. It's
Right.
one guy on the third floor and a caterer.
Okay.
And there's
Already, it's
Okay.
already just very
Yeah.
congested.
Fine.
taking this very small parcel of land, less than half an acre, and the relatively small structure on it, and changing it to house a 16-seat food and drink takeout restaurant, a separate catering business with associated vehicles coming and going all day, approximately 2,500 square foot of office space filled with businesses and their clients, and 6 apartments, and then expecting it to exist and thrive and be consistent with the spirit of the above statement that the new use is not more detrimental to the neighborhood and is consistent with the intent of the zoning bylaws is difficult to agree with at best. The picture painted of all apartments at half occupancy and even less needing cars, the cafe never having more than 16 people patronizing it at once, and the office space and a catering business staying at reduced occupancy is not accurate or fair. We hope that the Board of Appeals will consider the full pragmatic potential of all of these uses happening at once and the true impact this has for the potential to negatively affect the neighborhood. In sum, if this idea was put into motion before the recent owner of Bent's properties or our home and the factory were split up in 2002 and sold the parcel we now own, maybe then it could have be made to work. When the two properties were together, prior to 2002, you may have been able to fit this much activity on the much larger piece of land. When it was a thriving biscuit company, the properties were one. You could then use the back of our parcel for the additional parking and for the turnaround area needed, and you could possibly use our property for a second entrance or exit to the business. The point is, where there was once room for this, there is now none. We love the factory. This isn't about us wanting Falcone to fail. We love the cafe. It's rich. The building is rich in history and has a connection, a direct connection to our house. We want it to be preserved as part of Milton's history, but not at the expense of our neighborhood. This proposed use will not work. We firmly believe that if these modified further variances are granted, we will lose, the neighborhood will lose, Mr. Falcone will lose, and Milton will lose. As sustaining this much activity with the associated traffic on such a small parcel with far less than the needed parking in such an already congested area will result in failure, or worse, more serious accidents. That's all I got.
I would
Well,
also just, can I say one thing in
of
addition
course
to
you
this?
can.
I mean, we've lived in many apartments. We actually used to own a multifamily where we were owner occupied in that situation. So we've dealt, we're not against apartments. I work for a nonprofit that specifically works with children who live in public housing. This is not a situation where I think that we're afraid to have neighbors who are renters. We have no problem with that. We welcome that. We think Milton needs it. But we just feel that these apartments in this area, it's not a good fit. I think the idea behind micro apartments is that, you put them in densely populated urban areas like New York, like Tokyo, like parts of Boston. And people can live in such a small space because they have access to all of the infrastructure of the city and, the businesses in the neighborhood and everything else. And this is not an urban area that can support the people living in these micro apartments, which is, that's why they're geared toward more urban areas. There's no rapid transit. We actually Googled our commutes to work. I work in Brookline, Jerry works in Stoughton, and it was gonna take me at 12 p.m. on a weekday when there isn't typically traffic, an hour and a half and 3 buses to get to Brookline, if I was going via public transit. And for you to Stoughton, I think it was 2 buses and then the commuter rail.
90 minutes.
Yeah,
It's a
so-
15-minute drive for me to get to work. 90 minutes using the public transportation that's offered on Randolph Ave.
So the point being that, we're not against micro, I even think there's areas of Milton where this could work, but I really don't think this is an area.
Yeah, and the point that Ann spoke to, with the test of this, is it doesn't,
Could I ask you one question?
Yeah.
Because there's been some testimony here, and it is that if the micro apartments were scrapped and a commercial bakery,
Yeah.
which is permitted, is allowed to exist on the second floor of the apartment, that they'll need at least 12 or more parking spaces, and they'll have 20 or 30 employees working on the second floor of the building. Doesn't 6 micro units with only one person and 6 cars, isn't that less intense?
not in my opinion.
And if you get your wish, won't the wish make your life more miserable because of the increased activity at the building?
Well, I think there is certainly something to be said for, as direct abutters, we of course prefer the business use because it's limited to those hours, versus a 24/7 use continuing. And I think there's sort of two separate issues. One is, for you guys in the Board of Appeals, are they legally allowed to do this, or are these variances able to be granted, And then, of course, the other issue, and this is for them to figure out, is how can the building be used? But I think to push through something that doesn't fit, at the sake of the neighborhood, doesn't feel fair. We want the building to be preserved, but it's a tiny lot. I understand that there are challenges, but that is the reality,
Let me ask you one more question, because
Yeah.
you've made an interesting presentation. We had a letter to the board from Lee Toma, and what her fear is here is that if this renovation doesn't take place because it's not financially viable, then it's going to be replaced with a big, she says, a big, bland condominium building. Is one of the issues that you
That's-
should be...
There's a lot of
I mean, that's,
speculation.
that's a lot of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, what I'm trying to say is I've had some experience with development, and this is I think it's a 10,000, what's the lot here, 10,000 square feet or something
clue.
like that?
I think it's 9
appro-
something, yeah.
It's approximately 10,000 square feet. And I've had an occasion to look at Cambridge zoning, where it was deemed possible on an 8,000 square foot lot to put 14 condominium units there. And I wonder if this is a 10,000 square foot lot, if you could put 16 or 18 condominiums there by demolishing the building, getting rid of the historic
Yeah.
use, and just turning it over to the engineers to max out the property for its highest and best commercial use, to make as much profit as they can on the deal. Isn't that
But a
making
new
isn't that making
developer-
the situation worse?
But a new developer would need variances to do that, to
They
build a
would.
16-unit condominium, right? So
Well,
ideally, they get
I
before
don't
this
know,
board.
they would, whatever the zoning is, I didn't do a zoning analysis of this property. If you assume it was destroyed, it was demolished, and then you're not dealing with historic preservation issues anymore, and the question is, how many condominium units could you put there? I mean, have you calculated that, or had a
No.
lawyer calculate it, or?
No,
anything?
I mean, we're
yet.
kind of focused on this.
But
I know, but
again-
couldn't you be biting yourself
I mean, I hear
in
what-
in
I
the
hear-
backside if the board denied
Well, I
the
mean,
the variance?
it,
And you find out there's an expression, I hate to say this, don't get mad at me, Mr. Falcone, but the devil you know sometimes is better than the devil
Well,
you
we
don't
feel
know.
that because of the Airbnb, like that, I think that speaks to, once these variances are granted, if the property sells or whatever else, I mean, there's no telling, they can promise a year lease, but
Okay, but
somebody.
you understand in espousing the position that
Yeah.
you're espousing, that Mr. Falcone is not obligated to build anything there. He's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
he doesn't
we
have to
do.
build anything, he can sell it, he can knock the building down, he can do whatever he wants,
right.
and then you'd be subject to the
I-
vagaries of the
I hear
marketplace.
what you're saying, I do, I really do, but I also feel that to push something through for the sake of this historical building, you know, and that doesn't fit with the neighborhood, again, you know, I think
What I think is more likely is he doesn't use the apartments, he walks away from the apartments, but he builds a commercial bakery there.
Yeah.
And then he's got a full-scale commercial operation
Well, then at least
going.
it's in, it goes with the zoning.
I
Yeah,
mean,
but you have more parking.
yeah,
The-
of course, I don't think that that's a good
The evidence is it's
fit
gonna be twice
either.
as more parking.
I would hope that the town would,
Well,
you know,
we-
step in. and-
Bakery,
We knew that, excuse me? No.
if I can make a comment on a bakery that could go back in there, because we do have potential bakers that want to go in there.
Great,
Commercial bakers, they bake bread,
great,
okay?
Yeah,
They start at 3 o'clock in the morning,
great.
yeah,
and that's when they'll start, up the driveway, up and down. I'm not betting you, I'm just saying that's what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
We have a right to do that.
Okay.
yeah.
It's a 24/7. It's operated like that before.
I mean, again, we're gonna have to live with what happens. We understand that, but I think we have valid.
Do you wanna come back
concerns,
over, Bob?
You know,
The best use that we thought was the less detrimental to the neighborhood.
yeah,
We're using all efficiency, high efficient apartments, air conditioning units, heating units.
yeah.
We don't change that, there'll be no venting. there'll
We
be no-
appreciate what you're
there'll be
saying.
no grease traps in the
Yeah.
town, because we don't have to do it.
Yeah, we
There'll be no
appreciate what you're
paving,
saying.
The apartment stays, it's all right. I mean,
All right, that's fine.
it doesn't matter to us.
I've got this to say. Thank you for coming tonight and telling us your views.
Thank you.
We appreciate very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to be heard? Yes, sir.
I just included a copy of the letter, and there's
Oh, great.
Oh, thank you.
That's good.
Thank you. Nice presentation, by the way.
Oh, great, thank you.
So my name is Rob Hallowell. I live at 3 Jill Kathleen Lane.
I'm sorry, just one second. Rob Hallowell. And where do you live, sir?
3 Jill Kathleen Lane with my wife,
Oh,
Deepa
sure.
Rangachari. That's
Yes.
3 houses up from Bent's. I've submitted a handwritten note on behalf of my neighbor Kathleen Grant, who lives at 27 Pleasant Street. That's 2 houses up from Bent's, and she would like that handwritten letter submitted on her behalf. And I've spoken with her and have promised her that I would read her letter to the board.
Oh, great. You're going to make your own separate presentation or just read this to
I'll
the
make some
board?
comments afterwards, but I promised her that I would come tonight and speak on her behalf because she felt
That's fine.
strongly that her comments be made here.
The floor is yours.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm channeling the spirit of Kathy Grant, and if you have not met Kathy Grant, you should. She is a remarkable woman and has been a fixture of the community, well, long before most of us were born. Well, not all of you, but most of us.
Be careful.
Yes, you're really treading dangerously here. Why don't you begin reading the letter? Thank you.
Holes get deeper.
My name is Kathleen Grant, 27 Pleasant Street, 2 houses up from Bent's. I've been here 48 years. This is a residential neighborhood. Falcone knew what the factory's limitations were when he bought it. It sounds euphemistic to try and save this historical site by cannibalizing its structure. Sad when greed rears its ugly head, a real detriment to the neighborhood. Traffic is outrageous already, with many near accidents. It's a cut-through from 28 to avoid the light. You are all aware of that factor. There is parking both sides of the street already, with huge delivery trucks blocking the street at any time of day, and you want a variance to open on Sunday? Would you want that in your neighborhood? The size of the micro apartments is unbelievable. You say professionals would want to live there. With businesses above you, catering beside you, truck deliveries in and out, the bakery with sit-down tables and people outside blocking everywhere, rubbish needing to be picked up daily, or you'll have a rodent problem, no thanks. Parking for residents is a ludicrous setup. There's no room no matter how you plot it out on paper. Visitors on the street, you say no cars park on the street at night or they'll be ticketed. Every night across from my driveway, a car or two sits there days on end, but no tickets. How to regulate this nonsense requires a live-in maintenance man to enforce the rules and laws. I foresee a disaster. We will bear the brunt of the so-called saving of a historical site. What professional would live in those cramped quarters for a bus line? Think again. Outrageous rents might become a boarding house. Great salvation of a historical site. No thanks. You are welcome to invite Falcone's dreams to your neighborhood if you think it will enhance your residential ambiance. How clever to hire Mrs. McEttrich, who sat on this board for many years. She knows all the ins and outs of rules, variances, etc. At the last meeting, one of the neighbors spoke in favor of these mini apartments. Her daughter would like it, she said. Now she's moving and doesn't have to live here with this disaster. This doesn't sound very fair to me. This is not an urban setup. We are in the suburbs. What will the town become if we grant such offensive use of a residential neighborhood? We're better than this Milton, a sought-after community because of our schools, fire, police, etc. We have town meetings and a willingness to listen to its people's needs and the value system this town purports. Kathleen Grant.
Great. Thank you for Ms. Grant's letter. We'll enter that into the record.
So those are Ms. Grant's sentiments, which I promised her I would read verbatim. I have some of my own sentiments, having met with the Fowlers, having listened to all of you, and I think there's a lot of good sentiment here. I think there's a lot of emotion here. I think we spent a lot of time hearing people talk about how they love going to bakeries and having coffee and grilled cheese and preserving historical sites, and I think we're all having a violent agreement about things that we like and want to preserve about our communities, and I really don't think that's the issue here. I think the real question is, does it have to be done a certain way? Is there really no other way to preserve this building in a financially viable manner other than to have micro apartments in our community? I mean, is there really no other way? Can you not have normal size apartments? Mrs. Grant also wanted me to tell you that she was at Milton Hospital today and did a survey between the hours of 10 and 12:30 where she asked professionals from radiology, pain management, and blood draw, and found 0 professionals who would be willing to live in a micro apartment. That may or may not be true. It's not a scientific survey, but she wanted me to make that statement today. But I think it raises a fair question about the type of clientele who would be willing to live in these micro apartments. Of note, we probably will have 90 apartment units directly across the street in the near future. We all read the papers. We know this is coming, and that certainly will change the traffic pattern down our quaint little patch of Pleasant Street. But I just still don't quite understand, Mr. Falcone, why we need to have 6 micro apartments crammed onto this floor. I don't understand why we can't have a viable financial option that preserves the integrity of the historical site with a quaint bakery without having normal apartments that are more conducive to the type of neighborhood that really fits this part of Milton. I do think the size of the apartments is a bit ludicrous. It sounds to me like the concept of a micro apartment, while it sounds very 21st century and hip and urban in sort of a New York chic way, which, as an aside, we don't live in New York. We live in Milton, and we live in Milton for a reason, because we don't want to live in Boston or a true urban environment. But to me, it sounds like this is just a way to make a bigger profit on a footprint. And you're probably one of the most successful builders and developers in the area. And I think that's a testament to you as a businessman. I think it's a testament to your ingenuity. And I'm not just blowing smoke. I mean, you are truly a talented developer. If anybody else can make this work in a reasonable way that doesn't involve jamming micro apartments onto a floor, you can probably make that work. So is there really no other way?
I can address that. Let me answer that question.
Yes, please.
First of all, they're really not micro apartments. We do have one small one, but we're willing to look at changing it to go to 5. It's square foot. You rent apartments by the square foot. If we have 2,500, 2,600 feet on the floor, that's what we're gonna develop for apartments. If it's 5, fine. If it's 6, it's okay. they're the same, you get the same price per square foot. If we build 5, we're building 1 less kitchen, 1 less bathroom, 1 less laundry room. You're gonna get the same amount. The average size of our apartments is somewhere, we have 600 and, let's see,
First of all,
660
a micro,
feet.
a micro apartment is 300 feet or under.
Right,
There's a 650 square foot apartment, there's a 450 square foot, there's a 530 square foot, and
Right.
there's a 380 square foot.
Right.
There's one that is 246 square feet that we're willing to nix.
right,
So
so
that
that,
would make the 346 square foot unit larger, so it would be about 400.
so we'll have 4 one-bedroom apartments and 2 studios. We own and manage, we've had as many as 10,000 apartments in our lifetime. Our average one-bedroom apartment throughout the whole South Shore in southern New Hampshire, a one-bedroom apartment is about 500, 600 feet. Studios are 450 to 500 max. And we get market rate, we have 100% occupancy. There's a demand for these kind of apartments. People do not want to pay $3,000 a month, huge tax bills, upkeep of a lawn, shoveling snow in the winter, and doing that. They're not really micro apartments, that's just the name. These are regular, one-bedroom and studio apartments that you will find anywhere in East Milton Square in 2 families. We own 2 families in East Milton Square. We have a one-bedroom, 2-family that's only 900 feet. It's a house,
There's a big difference between 900 feet,
but that's a house. It's a house.
but it's still 900 feet.
It's a house. These are apartments where the house, these people live in a house, they have to shovel the walk, they have a driveway, some have a garage, and they have to do the maintenance. In an apartment, they don't do any of that. We do it. That's our operation, that's our, we've been doing it since I was 14 years old. And we know the business. These apartments will rent and they serve a purpose for the town. And I take to heart Mrs. Grant's statement about Beth Israel. I was there myself today, and I asked around. And the people aren't gonna be the surgeons or the doctors. It's gonna be the x-ray technicians that work 12 and 14-hour shifts. They might have to do a 3-day work. They might want one of these apartments, so they don't have to go back and forth to where they live in Berkeley, Raynham, Wenham, not Wenham, Rentham. That's where some of those people commute from. And they just want a shot here. They're not married, they're single, they might be divorced, they have issues. And that's the market we're looking for. Also, Milton Academy has teachers that they hire out of college. They're young 23, 24-year-old men or women that aren't married. They work 6 days a week. They're at the school probably 7 days a week. And they need a place to live in the area where they're not commuting or paying $4,000 a month for that same apartment in Boston, which they can get in Milton for somewhere between, our rent range is probably gonna be somewhere in the vicinity of $1,400 to $2,500 a month. And they're gonna be high efficiency. They're gonna have a state-of-the-art central heat, central air conditioning, all high-end appliances, high-end kitchens. These are not gonna be horrible apartments like you would think. So it's a total misconception, and that's wrong. And the building is not gonna move. The building's gonna be there. If it's gonna be 48 inches from the Fowler's house, it's still gonna be, if it's an apartment, or it's the kitchen for the commercial bakery, it's gonna be there at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning with lights on and making noise. The building's still gonna be there. I'm sorry, the building's not moving. Unless I tear the building down, and then I join the guy across the street and put up an apartment building and come in with a 40B, which I really don't wanna do. That's not what we do. So, I mean, I'm not, those aren't threats, those are just,
No,
that's the
we
facts.
understand. Mr. Hallowell, why don't you continue with your presentation? Thank you, Mr. Falcone, we appreciate it.
No, I think that's it. I have no other questions.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank
We appreciate it. And give our best to Mrs. Grant, or Miss Grant. Is it Miss Grant? Anybody else would like to be heard on this application? Yes, sir. Now, I think we heard from you last hearing. Is that true?
The one before that.
The one before, right?
Yeah,
Right.
it was my brother, the last.
Yes. Why don't you tell us who you are?
I'm Frank Battaglia. I live right next door to Bent's Cookie Factory. And I just want to say a few things about the area where the apartments are going.
Yep.
I lived there for 63 years. I've seen a lot of changes and a lot of changes for the better or the worse, whatever it was. But I just stand in solidarity with the Fowlers and the Grants that the traffic situation is tough. And I was just wondering if you addressed that with the traffic engineers, what they had to say about it. I know there's a lot of traffic coming off of Randolph Ave, and that's just want to reiterate that those questions about traffic and the snow plowing at night, and it was just one storm this year, and it was just, you know, it was early in the morning, could hear the beeping and beeping. The plows at the town...
Was this at Bent's, you mean?
Yeah, the
Okay.
plows in the town is no problem. They gotta do their job, of course. But the other issues is just, it's just too confined of an area, I think. But to manage that apartments and 6 spaces, and who's to say that other people aren't gonna visit, where they're gonna park, you know, people in the micro apartments have visitors, and they'll stay there and park wherever on the street, or, you know, I just have those same issues as the Fowlers and Grant, and just think it's the wrong area. And you gotta get this plan right, because if it goes through, it's gotta, it sounds good on paper, and everything looks fine, but the reality of it is it gonna work in reality of the whole area? You know, the actual presentation is good, but you have to get it right, because if you don't, it's just gonna be a mess. And that's all. I mean,
Okay.
just the trash issues and the area with the two-way traffic, that's gotta be addressed, turnaround and all that. But other than that, it's just, you know, I have the issues with the traffic and everything, and the
Great.
congestion and the way, you know, we had to put up with Jill Lane. That was 2 years of pounding and all construction and all that. And they're cramming everything into the street. It was once a, you know, nice neighborhood, residential. But the bakery, if you want to put a bakery up there, that's, you know, your option. Who's to say there's gonna be a lot of employees at the bakery? And he's allowed to operate at 3 in the morning and all that. That sounds good, but I don't know. It's just, I just have concerns about it, and if you want to address them, would you address them with the traffic engineers?
We heard the evidence that was presented to us.
Or the-
I don't recall a traffic engineer testifying, to be frank about
Oh,
it.
they didn't make any decisions on it yet?
I don't think so, no, I don't, we haven't received that information.
Yeah, okay.
Everyone knows what Randolph Avenue is like.
Yeah, I agree. All right.
Good, thank you, we
All right,
appreciate it. Thanks for
okay.
coming, sir.
Okay.
Anybody else who'd like to be heard? Okay, the record indicates that nobody else wishes to be heard. Mrs. McEttrick, do you want to sum up, or are you content to rest your case?
Well, I'm pretty content. I mean, you've heard a lot of, I'm not content, hopefully we will be addressing many of the issues that were brought forward. I don't want to take a lot more time, and I know the hour is late. We hope you can reach a decision tonight. We hope you'll have some discussion before you close the hearing, so we'll have some idea what your thoughts are. I want to say a couple of things. On the traffic, there's a lot of traffic on Randolph Ave, and there's a lot of traffic that turns onto Pleasant Street. That's an existing condition. We're well aware of it. What we have done so far is the engineer for the project has met with the town engineer and the director of the DPW at the site and discussed the traffic situation, whether there is anything that can be done that might mitigate the speed with which traffic enters the intersection, and whether whether parking spaces being marked and parking being, even if it's restricted to only one side of the street, whether that could have a mitigating effect on the traffic. That's under discussion. We don't have the recommendation yet from the town engineer. We've agreed to do whatever they recommend in terms of manpower or marking or anything like that. And that will be a topic of discussion at the site plan review continued hearing on the 14th of February, and the planning board will be hearing whatever report comes out of that. I don't want to say there's a miracle, there's no miraculous solution to the volume of traffic on Randolph Ave. It's one of the characteristics of this site that it is on, it's practically on Randolph Ave, and there's a lot of traffic there. So it means that that's one of the things that makes this a difficult site in order to decide exactly how it should be used. We've tried to answer the questions that have been raised by the neighbors. It's interesting, it boils down to the applicant's position being that this is a lower impact use. We're only proposing a change for the second floor of this building. And there's an existing use. It's a commercial bakery use. It can be operated whenever, and bakeries, as far as I know, do a lot of their baking at night. If this is going to be an active operation, it will have some, probably nighttime. That's one of the reasons we didn't like it as much. And the other reason is that there are more employees, and there would be more impact on parking from that use than from this. As far as the configuration of the apartments go, again, I think you've already heard testimony that we have one very small apartment that was proposed. We're willing to talk about not having that apartment, having 5 rather than 6, which means that additional 240 square feet can be added to the next smallest apartment. They're not extraordinary. These are not tiny house apartments. They're smaller. Some of them I think of more as studio apartments, but they all have sleeping alcoves. They have separate areas. They're completely independent living areas with everything that you need. There is a common area. There is a bicycle storage area designed into this second floor apartment use. And so they don't appeal to every tenant. That's not the point. The point is that these are apartments that would serve particular types of tenants. I think of them as an apartment that might be attractive if my sons were still of the age when they were still living at home, working in their first jobs, making enough money but not a load of money, but they want to be in their own place, and they want to be in Milton or in the Milton area. This would be attractive to them. It could be an attractive apartment for an older person, too. So there's a market for the apartments. The whole argument here is based on the nature of the impact from this use versus the nature of the impact from the allowed pre-existing non-conforming use. And the fact that, in addition to that, we're asking for a variance. A variance can be accompanied by conditions. The board can put, you can put any conditions you want on it. If we can't live with them, then I guess we won't use the variance. We've tried to suggest a number of conditions to you, but clearly the restrictions in leases are things that should be included as conditions if you choose to grant this relief. That means that even if somebody else purchases this property, they have to lease the apartments with the same conditions in the leases. That's just an example. So everything we've talked about as a way of protecting neighbors and of making this a better use, you should think of as a condition. It's the reason we're looking for a variance. We're not asking to rezone this site. Rezoning has lots more perils associated with it and unknowns as to what might happen. I think We've tried to describe what will happen, and I've worked with the Falcones on other projects, and they will do the project as they've described. That's been my experience. That's the best I can tell you. I wish I did know all the ins and outs of an application to the Board of Appeals. I don't, but yes, I did serve on the board a number of years ago. Thank you very much.
If I could add to Marion, I mean,
Sure.
Mr. Battaglia made a comment about need to see the plans that we presented built. I think we have a proven record in town of the many things that we built with the same people that we've hired. Morse Engineering and Steve Tedisco, and we use, direct contractors if we don't do it ourselves. And everything that's been presented on a plan has been built exactly, if not according to the plan, or even better than the plan, as changes need to be made. And we work very well with the town engineer. Mr. Thompson's laid everything out, and I can assure you the parking is only on one side of the street. It's gonna be on our side of the street. There will be no parking across the street, because we actually have a plan from John Thompson. We have to put up a one-way sign and no left turn sign. So there is not gonna be we're not gonna be parked on both sides of the street.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you, Mrs. McGettrick. Board members have any questions of anyone, or?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So we're going to end the testimony of this hearing and discuss it in open session, as we're required to do. Mr. Alves, do you want to be first?
Actually, can I go back on my prior answer? I have one question.
You have a question, sure, you can
There's
ask your
been
question.
comments about the willingness of the applicant to reduce this to 5 as opposed to 6. That is something that you're putting on the table.
I am, and Cheryl Tagayas mentioned that in her letter that I think I tried to read to you. She suggested that we might want to consider that because it would mean one less parking space requirement. And I spoke to the Falcones about it, and they said they would indeed consider that. From a cost standpoint, when you don't have to create another apartment, your costs are lower, then it means you can make another apartment larger. I mean, there's a certain amount of flexibility here. The concept of the smaller apartments, we felt would be one that would meet a need in Milton. It would not impose anything as much on the town's infrastructure as larger apartments. That's the best I can tell you in terms of what, there's a market. We've determined that there's a market. That's why we're proposing smaller size, but we don't need to have 6. We could have 5. We could thereby increase the size of at least one of the apartments that's the smallest size next in the 5. So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Do you want to be heard, Mr. Alves?
Sure. First of all, thank you, everybody who appeared tonight. Thank you for your presentations, and I certainly heard the emotions, the sentiments. People were, it was real. I understand. This is a complicated case. Use variances tend to be. They tend to be disfavored in the law because it's basically undoing what the zoning says. Zoning says A, we've been asked to do something completely different than B, right? It's a residential zoned area, and we're being asked to change this. That said, there's a history to this property that I think we can't ignore. I'm just going to reflect on my thoughts here, and then I want to hear from my colleagues, because I'm not sure I've made a decision on which way to vote on this. The Falcones have the right to continue to use the property with a bakery on the second floor. We've heard evidence, uncontroverted, that the use of that use would have a greater traffic impact than the 6 or 5 units. So I'm sort of left with weighing, and I appreciate the Fowler's testimony and everybody who's testified about the character of the neighborhood, of the area being changed by this. We're left with a situation where, without requesting any relief from this board, they can operate the bakery. Full-blown commercial bakery that, again, from what I've heard, would have a worse impact in the neighborhood than what's being proposed. So and you quoted the provision in the special permit, is this gonna substantially increase any detrimental or injurious effect on the neighborhood? What I've heard is what's being proposed would actually lessen it. I haven't heard anything contrary to that. And I appreciate the various efforts the applicant has made to meet with the neighborhood, with the neighbors, and to try to address some of the more poignant concerns. There's no way to do this without having an impact. It's just the nature of the neighborhood, from everything I've heard. I've driven by, I've been to Bend several times. I think the added right-of-way that they've acquired that permits added parking is two-edged sword. I hear the Fowlers talking about, that means that they're going to be right out, maybe if the parking comes right down to the property line, even with the fence and the arborvitaes and the vegetative cover, it's gonna be right where my kids play. That resonated with me, I get it. So I'm left sort of weighing the equities here in a way, which is kind of an odd position to be in. Nobody's entitled to a variance. I think Mrs. McKettrick made that clear. But there is enough about this property that would actually fit it within the very rigorous legal standard. It's oddly shaped, it's sloped, so the aspects of the property itself make it, if you were to take off each of the sort of prongs of the variance requirements, that this would fit. So I've been thinking a lot about this, read all the materials, I appreciate all the testimony I've heard today. I am inclined to vote in favor of this, but I am not there yet. So I'd like to hear what my colleagues have to say. I appreciate what the neighbors have said and the incremental additional impact that this will bring to bear. But on the other hand, I'm left with this, if we do nothing, if we deny this, isn't the alternative worse? I don't have an answer to that question, but I haven't heard anything that says that it isn't. In fact, the only evidence we've been presented with is that the impact of a full commercial bakery would actually be much worse to this. I appreciate Mr. Clark's testimony about the need to, there's lots here, the need to, everybody agrees that we ought to preserve this historical property. Well, it costs, it's costly to upkeep it and preserve it, and there are alternatives, there are other ways that could be used to generate revenue to maintain the property. And again, all we have from the applicant is that they've considered several, and they've chosen what they think is the least intrusive, the least impactful on the neighborhood. That's what I'm left with. So choosing between alternatives, I'm inclined to vote in favor of the application, admitting that it is quite a request. There are a number of variants, the level and number of relief being requested here is very significant. So I'd like to hear from my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Alves. So Mr. O'Brien, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an interesting case. At the prior hearing, I made a remark during the course of the hearing that this was the most complicated non-40B case I've sat on, and I really do believe that that is the case. I want to thank Mr. Alves, my fellow board member, for basically saying everything that I was thinking. I too have been wrestling with this particular case. And while I'm not prepared to formalize my vote at this particular point in time, while I have considered everything that Mr. Alves has considered, I come to the exact opposite conclusion. Use variances in this town within the law are highly disfavored. This is a significant change in the use, a significant change in the neighborhood. There is a lot of relief being asked for here. We're basically being asked to turn the zoning code in this particular instance on its head. Having said that, that's why we get the big money as members of the zoning board, because we're called upon to wrestle with specific cases, specific circumstances. And I agree with Mr. Alves. If there was going to be a case where you were going to consider granting such substantial relief as being sought, this would be the type of case. A unique property, a historic property, a uniquely shaped parcel, which has its own problems. It also comes down, as my colleague has said, it's a balancing of the equities. When I balance the equities, I give substantial weight to the existing conditions, what's going on there now, and what could happen. I think my chairman is correct. While I understand full well, frankly, having been in the position that the Fowlers have been in before I was on the board, I can understand where they're coming from. On the other hand, be careful what you ask for. You may get it. So I'd like to hear more discussion because, as I said, for the exact same reasons, I'm leaning in the exact opposite direction. I'm leaning toward not granting the requested relief. I think that might be a first, Mr. Chairman.
Well, it may be, but it may not be. I want to thank Mrs. McGetrick and the applicant for their hard work on this application, for their flexibility in meeting with the planning board and meeting with us and trying to realistically take into account the views of the neighbors for the benefit of your client and for the benefit of the community. And I also think that those who both spoke at the public hearing and who wrote to the board, whether it's in support or in opposition to this application, were very well-intended comments. They were not harsh or derisive, and they were speaking from their own perspectives and their own hearts, and for that we thank you. I've been here for over 20 years, and I think only once in 20 years have I had the opportunity to tell somebody to stop talking because they were offensive, rude, and impolite. And these issues run deep. And I know how personal they can become. And I think everyone here has conducted themselves with integrity and to the best of their ability, the highest degree of honor. So I want to thank everyone for participating in this hearing. When I looked at this, I looked at it in a deeper perspective, I think, from what I did originally, because we've handled historic cases. But in point of fact, other than perhaps the Eustace estate, this is, and there are historical buildings in Milton that predate this particular building. But this building was used by Mr. Josiah Bent selling these crackers, water crackers, according to the history that I read, in 1801. That's when he started his water cracker business. It wasn't a bakery, I guess. It was a primitive bakery, and that's 218 years ago. The Eustace estate, which we granted variances on, is relatively new. That was in 1887, or 141 years ago. And so, this is an important consideration when one deals with historic preservation, and it's a favored thing as long as it can be accomplished without to the substantial detriment of the present owners. Here, the Historical Commission supports this application to preserve the structure. That's certainly an important consideration. the history of the building has to be considered as well. This building is in disrepair. It's gone through multiple recent owners. We did hear from, you'll excuse me, but I'm bad on names unless I know them in advance. But counsel for the previous owners.
Mr. Upton.
Yes, Mr. Upton appears, and what he said was the absolute truth. The previous owners didn't have the monetary resources in order to rehabilitate this building to what it really should be. I stopped by this building, and I took a look at it, and I thought, how sad. It didn't look to me like a pristine historic structure that one would dance with delight when you look at it. And I think that's because it requires a tremendous investment in order to, not just to upgrade it and to make it presentable, but to try to restore it to its previous glory. Here, in my view, you have to consider who the applicant is. Somebody mentioned this, that the Falcones have a substantial history and experience as a high-quality developer in Milton, as well as being involved in the best interests of Milton and its charitable endeavors. I think that historic preservation is a difficult issue here, principally because one could ask, well, what's the purpose of the renovation? Is it to make money? I don't think that is. I think if Mr. Falcone was out to try to make as much money as he wanted in this building, he'd probably try to develop it into as much of a commercial venture as he could. As I see the plans as presented by Mrs. McGettrick and the various experts, what he's trying to do is to rehabilitate the building and to do it in such a way that would have the least type of impact on the neighborhood. And that would, at the same time, restore it so that Milton, the town of Milton, can be proud of having this historic building still in existence. I support historic renovation, but I have to say, from an amateur's perspective, why do people do this? I mean, we had Peter Kelly should come in, and he wanted to rehabilitate the Milton Hoosier Club. And the neighbors wanted it torn down and turned into single-family buildings. And I'm shaking my head. He fell in love with the building. He thought it was historic. He thought he could invest in it. He thought he could restore it to its glory, and he wanted a shot at us, this board, allowing him to do that. So some people say, why would Mr. Falcone do this? Well, there's a lot of things. It's historic nature of it, preservation for the town, having an association with a dying structure that's been restored to its to a new glory. Some people would say, preservationists would say, why not? Everyone should be preserving every historic structure in town. So there are always interesting factors that go into people's motivation when they're doing this, and my view of the evidence was that this was not Mr. Falcone trying to make the biggest profit he could on this rehabilitation, but rather something that he wanted to make sure it was financially viable, but yet he wanted to do it in a manner that had the least impact on the neighbors. I think that use variances, as Mr. O'Brien said, they're sparingly granted, and boy, I'm a fan of that at every use variance hearing I have. I always talk with the applicant in public session, as I have here, and told Mrs. McGettrick These, we're not the town meeting. We have the power to write use variances. We can rewrite the zoning bylaw. It's given to us right in that bylaw, but it's a power that has to be sparingly exercised. We're not elected public servants. You don't like what we do here, you can't go to the voting booth and vote us out. We're appointed by the moderator, presumably because we have some legal skills in interpreting zoning and all of that. So as non-elected officials, I always say, and have said here, that I wanted to see, before I would consider a use variance, that the Board of Selectmen weigh in on favor of this variance, that the planning board favored this variance, that the town planner favored the variance. In other words, that this is in the best interests of the town of Milton as a whole. That's how we interpret this zoning bylaw. We have to interpret it individual cases, and we say what is in the best interests of the town of Milton and what is in the best interests of the neighborhood. What happens at these hearings, and it's natural, that those people who are immediately affected are at the hearings and they're objecting or they're making suggestions or whatever, as they're perfectly entitled to do. But what you don't hear from these hearings is, so that's about 1% of the town of Milton. You don't hear the other 90% who come and say, why are you allowing our town hall to be demolished to put up what we have over there? And couldn't we have renovated that and have a fabulous town center? Why aren't we in favor of preserving various structures in town? And when you look at, from my perspective, the use variances that we have granted, and we grant them sparingly, I think they've been home runs. We granted a use variance for the Milton Marketplace, which was a Ford dealership that was in disrepair and had gone bankrupt, and it was a disgrace to the town of Milton when traffic went by it for months and months and months, and nobody would sink money into that particular venture. The Eustace Estate, what a magnificent acquisition that was, and what a wonderful use variance we granted so that property could be rehabilitated. It's a startling structure. It adds culture, it adds humanity to Milton. And if we had denied that use variance, it would have probably gone into disrepair and be sold off as house lots, a subdivision like you see that's going to be going up somewhere in Upper Canton Avenue. The Seasons Hospice, which is the former rectory of St. Elizabeth Church, that brings tears to my eyes. That was going to be a condominium building that was stuffed with condos, and it looked awful.
Or a Dunkin' Donuts.
Or a Dunkin' Donuts, and instead, it's a facility that serves a religious, or at least a quasi-religious purpose, serving people who are terminally ill, and that brings more joy to me than any of the use variances that we've granted here. So that this particular application, as I view it, has the unanimous support of all of the town fathers. Brian Walsh, who's former moderator in the town of Milton for more years than I've sat, I think, on this Board of Appeals, speaks in support of this application. So to me, the question is, does this benefit the town? The selectmen say yes, the town planner says yes, the planning board says yes, and they're going to attach a zillion conditions to this, as well they should. And Mr. Falcone is saying that he's willing to take the financial risk to make this investment work. So I'm leaning towards Mr. Alves' position, that it's in the best interest of the town to grant this. And one question that I asked somebody, and it may have been an untoward question, and that is, what happens if relief is not granted here? We don't, the answer is we don't know. We don't know. But I can tell you this, if the building is not going to be financially viable, or if there are so many conditions attached to the proposal here that the Falcones throw up their hands and say, well, we tried, we did our best, and that's it. We're going to sell, or we're going to try to demolish the building. We're going to try to turn it into a commercial enterprise to the extent that we can. I really think that is not in the, it certainly is not in the best interest of the town to have this highly commercialized, and it certainly isn't, in my view, in the best interests of the neighbors to have a commercial baker there at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and having trucks coming in and trucking out. I don't care whether they're crackers or pastries. I think that would be a desecration of this building. So that from my perspective here, there are a lot of tough issues. There's no doubt about it. But I think that the overall discretion should go in favor of the town fathers. And I believe that the conditions that are imposed here, and that will be imposed here, are really some of the most serious conditions that we've ever imposed on any project anywhere in Milton. Maybe you'd say, well, this deserves it because of its location. But from me, looking at the big picture, I think the conditions that Mrs. McGettrick has recited and that will be in the decision are going to be at least adequate, and I hope more than adequate, to protect the neighborhood from this impact. I think that having a commercial bakery there is the worst of all circumstances. Everyone is all uptight over micro apartments, but Mr. Falcone, and I take him at his word, said by definition the only micro apartment here is the 250 square foot apartment, and he's willing to give that up and to make all the apartments 450, 500 square feet, whatever they come out to be. I think that's a good gesture. I think it's probably a good idea here. If we voted this variance, I think that's one of the conditions that I'd want to add here. But I think overall, you can buy into what is known, which to me is appropriate and helpful to the neighborhood and not harmful, or we can torpedo this. It needs a unanimous vote to pass us. So if it gets torpedoed, then you don't know what you've asked for, you don't know what's going to happen, it's going to be out of your control, and you may end up in a situation that's much worse than a known situation that, in my view, is going to be fully controlled by all of these conditions. So that's my view. I think I would vote in favor of this variance with all of the strictures that we have here and have been discussed at the hearings. And in addition to that, I would incorporate as a condition to this variance all of the conditions of the site plan review by the planning board when it finally issues those conditions, and we can incorporate them by reference so that if, as, and when any of these conditions is not met, the board still has the ability to come in and rectify those untoward circumstances. And I think the probabilities of that happening are very, very low under the circumstances. So I've spoken too long, but that's the way I see it. What's in the best interest of the town? Maybe it's not directly coinciding with the so-called best interests of the neighbors, but I think the neighbors can be sufficiently protected here with all of these conditions so that you will not have the worst of all worlds. In fact, you'll have a better world than if this property remains uncontrolled or sold to another third party whom we don't know what they'll do with the property. So that's my view. Does anybody else want to be heard? Mr. O'Brien, do you want to pick up the mantle, or what do you want to say?
I continue to wrestle with this. I think that there is a lot of truth in what you've just said in terms of the unanimous support from the elected officials in the town. It's rare that the Historic Commission, the Planning Board, and the Board of Selectmen are all unanimous. I wrote the decision on the Seasons Hospice. We sat as a board there, and so I'm well familiar with that. So I'm now processing this application within the confines of that particular decision. I do think that at the end of the day, the stumbling block here are the apartments. The apartments tend to be disfavored in Milton. I think one of the points made was this may not be the right place for them, but there is a need for that sort of property in the town. There is a lot to be said for the credibility of the applicant who comes before the board on this. The Falcones have been before the board a number of times and have a good record in terms of building what they said they were going to build. So that there's a lot to be said about better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. So I'm changing my mind. I would be prepared to vote for this, and I think, Mr. Chairman, you persuaded me. I would want to see stringent conditions attached to this. I would agree with you in terms of reducing the number of apartments. I think subject to planning board review. You know, if it wasn't Bent's, if it wasn't a historic property, as you've said, I probably would not be willing to go this far on a use variance, and I think that this is pretty darn far. And I do think that the neighbors have some legitimate expectations, but sometimes also I think one of the jobs that we have sitting here, like it or not, is sometimes we have to protect the town as a whole. And I'm reminded of the old cliche, a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. And that basically says that, look, you know what's gonna be done here, you know what's gonna happen, as opposed to trying to make a prediction that something better is gonna happen on down the road. So, that's where I'm at. So I'm persuaded, Mr. Chairman, that, to vote in favor of this, somewhat reluctantly, but in favor of it.
Mr. Alves, do you want to be heard?
I'll just say this, and I just want to, again, thank the neighbors and everybody who's come and made their feelings and their perspectives known. There is quite a bit to be decided before the planning board that I think can go to alleviate, address some of your concerns. I would encourage you to stay involved in that process. There's a list here of 10 separate items that the applicant provided to us that's currently on the docket for the 14th of February. Things like the types of vehicles that can be used coming in and out of this property, a truck delivery plan, lighting. You know, there's much that can be done through that process, not here, that I think can address some of your concerns. But I do think that, I agree with the chairman that we're not elected, can't vote us out, can't reduce our pay. The elected officials are in favor of this. I've listened to the testimony of what's come before this board, and I think that this would be in the best interest of the town, and I too would be inclined to vote in favor of the application.
Okay, so let's put it like this. We have a myriad of specific conditions that Mrs. McGetrick has agreed to in the various filings that she's presented to us. So I would suggest that we put this to a vote, subject to the incorporation of all of the conditions that have been given to us by Mrs. McGetrick, and that we also include and adopt by reference all of the conditions in the site plan review by the planning board, if, as, and when it's granted. Okay?
The only other added thing would be a reduction in the.
And a
total-
reduction in the
total
number of
number
units to,
five.
from 6 to 5 units. So all those who are in favor of
Well,
that,
Mr. Chairman, before we go
Yes,
there,
please.
and also the usual conditions that it be made with substantial compliance with the plans on file with the
oh,
board.
yeah, absolutely, with all of the regular conditions that we attach to variance and special permit grants.
So a technical question, are
Yes.
we incorporating the findings of the planning board, or are we approving this subject to?
We're going to incorporate by reference the order, the final site plan review order as to what needs to be done with all of the technical aspects of this that's before the planning board.
But in the odd chance that the planning board does not approve it, what does that make of our decision? Shouldn't it be subject to?
Well, I guess technically, yes, but I think there's not much of a doubt that the planning board is
You
going
you
to.
could do both.
They're,
You
pardon
can
me?
do both. You could do subject to approval by the planning board of the site plan and incorporating all
findings.
elements of the site plans.
So I suggest we do both.
Just for the edification of folks who are out there, what we're doing, what this board does is we do the zoning, the land planning stuff. The details of which, many of which were mentioned by the lady who spoke in the middle, would lighting, drainage, stuff like that is done by the planning board. They handle the details.
Plowing and traffic.
The plowing
all
and
of that,
traffic.
all of that.
A lot of stuff that is of deep concern to the neighbors and abutters. So I would, as Mr. Leonard has said, I would encourage you to maintain your advocacy on this and to participate actively in the planning board process, because you'll get a lot of your issues dealt with and handled at the planning board. Because that's what the planning board truly does.
So all those in favor of the various variances and special permits and relief requested by the applicant in this decision with the conditions that we've just discussed, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Mrs. McGetrick, are you going to be submitting a proposed decision?
I can certainly do that. I understand that you'll probably rewrite it.
We will.
But I will
Rest
give you
assured.
a product that will list as much as I can find of all of these conditions that we've discussed. I wanted to ask you one thing. You have been given a conceptual building plan which shows 6 apartments. Do you want us to give you another plan that shows 5, or do you want to simply say we're allowed to have 5 and whatever? I mean, it's a bit of a problem because you usually
I
tie your
think-
decision to the plan.
Yes, and I think you
Excuse
should
me.
modify the plan.
Okay, so
To
we
show
know we
5
can do
units.
that, and we will provide that as soon as we can, possible. So that will be part of your decision, and we already told you that what that would be is the smallest apartment would be removed, and the square footage will be added
To the other
to the
apartments
next
in some
smallest.
reasonable percentage.
It might require some moving around of the spaces,
Yeah.
and it's a conceptual plan anyway, but thank you, I just wondered about that.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
So with all of that, ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned for the evening. Thank you.